from the Commission on Credentialing, a lot of our colleagues from our community colleges and CSUs.
Yes,
See everybody today.
it is. So thank you. So thank you so much for reminding me. And we should be recording the chat also. So if someone can do that, one of my co-hosts. I can only really think of two things at one time. So welcome, you're at the Workforce Symposium. And this is a quick overview of our agenda for today. Each panel leads to the other. So we hope that everything that you hear today about our workforce needs in early childhood and education resonate with you. And we will be both recording this. We will have this available on 2 websites, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. And we will also be sharing our findings throughout this workforce symposium. We'll be asking you to enter your thoughts into the chat, onto a Jamboard, and we really want to hear input. This is not a one-way symposium. It's going to be important to hear from you. So we're going to kick off our welcome, and then we're going right into ECE, EDU TK workforce needs and the pre-3 credential. We're preparing then for the expansion of the extended learning workforce, which is after school, and they're going to tell you about the size of that workforce. We're going to then talk about workforce development in specifically pipelines, apprenticeships, and working with workforce development leads in the state, and then advocating for our higher ed needs, articulating what we need. We are Kathleen White, and I'm from BACCC, the ECE EDU Regional Joint Venture. We have Steve Bautista. Steve, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Steve Bautista. I work at Santa Ana College. I am the counselor and program coordinator for our Center for Teacher Education. I also serve as the president of ACTEP, the Association of California Community College Teacher Education Programs. Great to see everybody.
Great. And we have Mary Sandy, and I believe Mary's here already. Mary, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, good morning. I am Mary Vixie Sandy. I'm the Executive Director of the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
And we have Marty Alvarado, our Executive Vice Chancellor from our community college system. Marty, would you like to say hello?
Good morning. It is a great pleasure to be here with you all today, and I can't wait to hear all of the feedback from this amazing convening. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to start off with some quick facts. And just for those of you, I know we have many people working in our system on the call, but we also have many partners in higher ed. So we have over 2 million students in our community colleges. Of those, 112 plus are high school dual enrollment students, and that's a key part of our pipeline, which is why I've mentioned them. 1 in 4 community college students nationwide attend one of our California community colleges. And 51% of the CSU and 29% of our UC graduates are transfers from a community college in California. And I want you to think in terms of a funnel. If the California community colleges and our high school partners are at the mouth of the funnel, what are the inputs needed to create the workforce output at the end? And that's kind of our key question for today. What do you all need to ramp up for this workforce that we're going to hear more about today, that's expanding and quite honestly in crisis? 35% of our high school graduates in California do not attend higher ed the year after graduation. So I want you to think of that as a really key component of our Grow Your Own cluster. And of the 65% that attend college, 40% attend a California community college. So we are the school of choice. And we can be the school of choice for those who do not attend higher ed after they graduate. Growing our own will keep our high school graduates in school, employed, and engaged. And these are just some facts. Some of you know this already, but 85% of the early childhood center workforce and 54% of our credentialed teachers in California attended a community college. In 2018-19, we enrolled 146,000 students in our courses. This was prior to COVID. We ranked 5th in enrollment in terms of degree and certificate completion among the 10 priority career technical ed sectors. And we have the highest percentage of female students, 83%, with 67% of our students being non-white and 78 identifying as economically disadvantaged. And again, high numbers of dual enrollment students. So if you look at our who we serve and who is in our classrooms, these are the people we need in our education system. So how do we move this forward? Labor market demands include 124,000 job openings annually. This was pre-COVID in California. COVID absolutely disrupted our sector, and we'll be hearing more about that today. We may need up to 200,000 staff for after-school implementation, and we have a panel who are going to talk to you about that. We've clustered, our centers of excellence have clustered 20 key occupations in order to come up with this data. And I have additional data that I'll be sharing with you later about where we are in terms of early childhood and education labor market needs, the demands, as well as the vacancies. And then we're going to hear more about the new funding coming in, which will exacerbate this problem. Our state, as you all know, have had significant budget expansions in our sector, resulting in promising new programs. But if we do not have the workforce, we will not have successful growth in these areas. You all know COVID pandemic has destabilized our sector. It's increased retirements, job changes, unemployment, and women especially have been impacted. Lots of data around female workforce impacts around COVID. So we'll hear more about expansion, and please keep all that in mind. You're going to hear more about the new Transitional Kindergarten program from CDE and the teachers needed. Don't forget, we have our California Department of Social Services childcare programs that are expanding also. We'll need additional staff. And a brief look at our workforce. 27,000 in California work in licensed family childcare homes. 200,000 work in childcare in 10,000 licensed sites. 30,000 work in extended learning and after school in our 4,000 state supported sites. And another 30 to 40,000 work in privately funded after school and summer programs. 300,000 plus credential teachers, and over 100,000 people work in exempt care, caring for children as nannies, as friends, as neighbors, as family members. And we have a critical need now for child mental health professionals and a range of folks who work on school sites post-pandemic. Where are we going to find all these people? Higher ed serves them all, and we need to ramp up. Higher ed also has a workforce gap for their own faculty in specific areas. Today, I want you to think about what higher ed partners, what do our higher ed partners need? What do our CSU and UC and private institutions need? What do our high school partners need? What do we need in the community college system? And how do we ensure the workforce is ready for the available jobs that are going to be coming online that you'll be hearing about today? I'm going to turn it over to Steve Bautista, who's going to provide you with some specific examples.
Good morning, everyone. Excited to be here. Thank you, Kathleen. And great to see so many people from so many different parts of our system working together and having this really critical discussion. At ACTEP, we've actually had a chance to really think about this for quite a while and think about, what are the needs of our system, what are the needs of the collective systems to work together so we can help this workforce and help our state meet these workforce needs. Part of the priorities that we're really looking at is really bringing the systems together, the community colleges, the CSUs, the UCs, to build these collaborative pathways to support each other and to support our students in very holistic ways. That the bigger picture is really for, at least the community college, we're all struggling, I think, with a little bit of direct funding. specifically for this sector. I know I have experienced that locally in my own region. I know that's not the extent across the state, but I think across many areas of the state, we are really needing direct support for community college teacher preparation programs so that we can support the students who are at the very beginning of this funnel. They come with a lot of needs and a lot of assistance and support that's needed that we can't really provide. We did a survey of our members. Over 70% of our members in this work are doing this work without institutionalized funding. Many of them are doing it with grants or external funds to support this work, and we really need like system level and state support for this, the workforce needs and the work that needs to get done. And that really includes a lot of advising, a lot of supporting the students who are entering the pipeline, a lot of the workforce who will be coming back to the community colleges to seek information about the new credential and providing the access to curriculum, access to the courses and the support services they need in order to be able to get their degree, transfer, and move on. Some of the challenges that exist is that, you know, the funding that comes available really isn't directly tied to community colleges. It's tied to LEA, school districts, and other credential programs, but the funding is hard for us to secure to really support our students. And again, we're trying to diversify the workforce. We're using the leverage that we have to support our students, but we really need to support at that policy level to assist us with this work, and the collective group all coming together to figure out how we will work to really support students and to connect the dots for our students in this pathway moving forward.
Thank you, Steve.
Next slide.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to give a few examples of what Santa Ana College has done in terms of workforce, I'll give a few examples in the San Francisco Bay region, and then we'll go on to our
Sure, a couple quick examples. We have partnered with a local high school, Century High School. They have a Teach Academy, a California Partnership Academy, and we work to articulate their dual enrollment and their CTE courses into a certificate program at Santa Ana College as a direct pathway. That really promotes the transition from high school into our college and gives our students really, they actually earn a certificate when they graduate high school to work in after school programs. And so that's the kind of partnerships that exist. We also have direct transfer partnerships with our local universities, with CSU Fullerton. We've created an ITEP in special education. And with Chapman University, we've also created a transfer admission guarantee to promote special ed and elementary school teachers as well. And we really need to support system-wide, because a lot of my colleagues in other community colleges don't have the resources or the support to create those networks and partnerships. And so I think that's also part of the need that we need to be thinking about, and then also collectively looking at how we're going to really work towards this new workforce with this new credential, and really trying to figure out how to nuance our advising and our support so those students have access to the information they need in order to be able to, again, get those credentials and enter the workforce in those areas for our state.
Great, thank you. In the San Francisco Bay region, we have a project funded by our regional joint venture through the BACCC, which is our CTE consortium, on apprenticeships. They have been very supportive of our sector and have supported a teacher preparation pipeline project for the past 7 years. So hats off to the San Francisco Bay region. We're trying to grow apprenticeships as a way to increase our pipeline and reach down more intentionally into high school dual enrollments with pre-apprenticeship programs, and get high school students really on board with this career sector. It's not that hard. They're very enthusiastic. They just need a map. They want to work with young people. So we've had a commitment to dual enrollment for many years with our local district, and are hoping to, continue and grow that. Everything's paused a bit through the COVID pandemic, but hopefully we'll be picking that up. Critical linkages with our K-12s classrooms. We place students in the classrooms at all levels, early childhood, K-5, and then middle and high school. And for many years, we've had a blended department where early childhood and education students are together, taking courses together. It hasn't been separated. And I think that's a real advantage, because students often enter and they don't know what they want to do. They may want to, they all need jobs immediately in San Francisco. They all need to work, but they may enter after school, early childhood. They may want to open their own business or go into teaching. So really at the top of the funnel, we have lots of career choices, lots of questions, lots of students who say, I want to work with young people, but I'm not sure how and where. We also offer multiple certificates and degrees, and we have really the only youth worker certificate approved in the state. Anyway, lots of things happening at City College. In our region, we have a number of new apprenticeships that have started, and we have our Berkeley City College apprenticeship. I think someone from Berkeley is on, who has really led the way in apprenticeships in our region. And we have some new folks who have just started. City College is starting, Skyline College is starting, Hartnell College is starting. We've got some energetic folks starting in this work.
Kathy, I just jump in here. It's really great that you have done that work in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I applaud, and I'm glad they're supporting the efforts. But at other parts of the state, the strong workforce funds, I think we struggle because it's the same pot of money that we are competing with our public safety, our health, the future drone pilots, the high tech computer. So when we get into those spaces, it's very difficult for groups to prioritize education. And so I think Christina made a great comment about elevating and prioritizing this sector as part of the strong workforce, as the governor has proposed in his budget, and hopefully moving forward that we get more leverage in those discussions so that some of the money, again, supports the efforts that we're trying to do with this specific sector. And again, we are not a high wage sector, and we get this, and so we run into that competition as well. So, but
good point,
San
Steve.
Francisco, yes,
absolutely. I know everyone on this call, if you're at this workforce symposium, I know you believe and you know that teachers are at the heart of every single sector. So what we do impacts every single sector, every single workplace. I just can't imagine a more critical infrastructure job than teaching right now at all levels, ranging from early childhood up through higher ed. So I think we're as important as roads and plumbing and we're infrastructure. We're most certainly more important than plumbing, but definitely transportation, water. Without a teacher, you don't have higher ed, and you don't have sectors, and you don't have an informed workforce. So I do want to, before we go on to our next speaker, who I'll welcome shortly, we've had some questions in the chat. We will be posting both the video from this workforce symposium as well as the PowerPoint on the Teach for LA website, and hats off to Teach for LA for funding this effort. And it'll also be on the Teach for the Bay website, as well as our BACCC website. Hats off to BACCC and Teach for the Bay for also supporting this effort. So thank you. And we're going to lead into Mary Sandy, Executive Director of the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing, who will be welcoming us.
Thank you so much, Kathleen and Steve. I really appreciate the image of the funnel and all of the ways in which the two of you have just given us the tip of the iceberg of the ways in which the community college system is providing opportunities for access into this work. It has been said that education is the profession that enables all other professions, and you colleges, community colleges, are right there at the forefront of it. I am so grateful for the work that you do and for that short description of just the tip of the iceberg. And thank you for organizing this session. We at the Commission staff are quite eager to engage with this community and to continue discussions around the development of a pre-K3 early childhood specialist credential. I am not able to be here for the whole session, but Amy Rising and David DeGear from this Commission team will be here with you until the end. We have a remarkable opportunity before us, presented by the governor's and the legislature's decision to establish universal transitional kindergarten and make it available to all 4-year-olds in California, beginning in 2025. We've come close in prior years and decades to establishing universal preschool, and we are finally here. This is a game changer in California, and if we do it right, it will make a huge difference in the lives of our youngest learners as they make their way through pre-K and through 12th grade and beyond. Keeping them in the center of our work is essential to getting it right. Doing it right also requires that we develop and place a teaching workforce that understands how young children learn and grow and knows how to organize learning opportunities that meet our youngest learners where they are. In my conversations with many groups on this topic, I hear repeatedly a deep concern that we not press the norms of K-12 schooling down to our preschoolers and transitional kindergartners. I believe we are united across this community and all other communities I'm talking with in our intent and our goal to do the exact opposite of that by establishing a pre-K through 3 credential for early childhood specialists that is grounded in child development and early childhood education practices that are developmentally appropriate and ensure rich play-based learning activities that build on our youngest learners' assets and recognize and appreciate the beautiful diversity of our students and their families and enable them to grow and thrive in ways that lay a strong foundation for their future. This is an equity agenda, colleagues, and part of the sea change we have been building toward for some time now. The timeline for implementation of universal transitional kindergarten is moving very quickly, with full implementation by the 2025-26 school year. I know that the process for development of the pre-K3 early childhood specialist credential is moving faster than many of us are comfortable with. The fact is, though, that the only credential we have right now that is legally authorized to teach transitional kindergarten is the multiple subject credential, which is not grounded in child development, which is why the legislature made the completion of 24 child development or early childhood education units a requirement beginning in the 23-24 school year for teachers serving in funded TK classrooms. As of August 1st, 2023, all teachers in funded TK classrooms must have a foundation in child development and early childhood education. We are retooling the existing early childhood specialist credential that we've had on the books for many years. We are retooling it to meet that need. It will not replace the multiple subject credential, but it will create a pathway for multiple subject credential holders to meet the child development and early childhood foundational expectations for teaching beginning in 2023. It will also, and maybe even more importantly, provide a bridge and a pathway for the existing early childhood workforce to become teachers in the pre-K space as early childhood specialists. We've been working together for years now to get to this moment with the development of preschool learning foundations at the Department of Education, foundations that are currently under review for revision. Also with the development of performance expectations for the early childhood workforce, which were adopted by the Commission in 2019 and intended to guide the work in the state preschool program for the child development permit. We've also been working on the development of a common set of performance expectations for all teachers in general education and special education, and the development of a master plan for early learning and care that brings it all together. I'm glad we're here together today in this session to continue our collaborative work, and I look forward with you to a productive time together today and ongoing as we consider how best to meet this moment and meet it well. Thank you so much for letting me be part of the opening, Kathleen and Steve.
Oh, of course. Thank you, Mary, for your kind words, for your important words, and we support your efforts. So we'll be posting our outcomes. In order to get amazing outcomes, please enter the chat, and we have a link to the Jamboard as ideas about what you need. As you hear things come to you, enter it on your Jamboard. We want to hear your voices. So Mary, thank you for your presence today. Much appreciated. I'd like to next introduce Marty Alvarado, who is a Vice Chancellor from our California Community College System. And Marty will be with us to hear our voices this morning, and I'd like to introduce her to say a few remarks. Marty.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Again, it is a great pleasure to be with you all this morning. Very excited to see what surfaces on the Jamboard. My favorite part of this job is getting to listen to the field and hear what's top of mind, what's swirling, and to push a little bit on how we think about where we want to be as we go forward. So a few comments I'd like to share. I'm actually running to this meeting from the governor's budget, or the governor's press conference around the May revise. So very excited about what is swirling there, and it's interesting. Maybe a little fortuitous that his comments just before I joined this session were really oriented around what he called pro-life. The pro-life agenda. And I want to say, politics aside, what I appreciated about this was the framing of the investment, the comprehensive investment portfolio focused on humans, right? On children, on what Mary just shared, in terms of the education component, the healthcare component, just a really comprehensive portfolio of investments that are focused on supporting our youth and our communities. And with that framing, I was thinking about this conversation and what a historic moment we have, given the level of investment that is coming forward. I know for our, or that is proposed, I should say, we want to keep our fingers crossed to the end of June. But I know for our system in the community colleges, we are looking at the largest budget we have seen in the past 35 years. And only the past 35 years, because that's as far as our internal records will allow us to look back. At least with ease. And so we have a moment in time right now to really think about what we are building as we go forward and what we want to see transformed given this investment. And I'm going to, every space I'm in, I fully appreciate and recognize that we never have enough money. And the decisions around how we allocate those funds is always a challenging conversation with some, I'll put in air quotes, winners and some losers, right? Or never enough resources to go the full mile. But what I want to encourage us to really think about is, as we are going forward collectively, what I would love to hear is, what do we want to have transformed as we go forward, so that we are maximizing all of our investments, not just those that are focused on the comprehensive youth agenda, right? That was just referenced in the governor's budget, but also, as referenced earlier, our strong workforce investments, our CTE investments, our guided pathways investments, our student equity and achievement program investments, right? How are we thinking about the resources and what we want to have in perpetuity as we go forward? Because we know the dollars, that you hit a peak and at some point it's going to level out. And so how do we get prepared for that now as we maximize this moment in time? So what I want to orient folks around as you're thinking about entering information onto that Jamboard are my sort of standard 3 talking points: equity, continuous improvement, and student-centered design. And I really want to sort of point to, I spent almost 20 years on the workforce development side at a community college, and really have sort of wrestled with how much we are at a point in time where we also need a workforce upskilling in order to achieve the momentous things that we are trying to achieve as we go forward. So I want to encourage you all, as you're thinking about these investments, to think about, what do we need in order to be able to serve those who need us? Right, so that's the first part. When I think about continuous improvement and equity and student-centered design, you all know this better than anyone, and yet I feel like collectively we tend to be the worst takers of our own advice, that we need some self-care, we need some support, we need some investment in order to be able to best show up for those who need us. So we want to balance both what's that in the moment, in the classroom, direct service support that we need, coupled with the what do we need in terms of sort of upstream investments? What do we need in terms of policy changes, in terms of ongoing funding streams? Again, what do we want to see built? Do we want to solve the Child Development Center problem in terms of the finances, right? On campus structures there, right? I feel you on this, right? It's such a critical component, and it's so central to the learning environment that we are trying to create on campuses. How do we begin to wrestle with some of these longstanding systemic structural problems that we need to resolve if we're going to be able to thrive going forward? right? So when I'm thinking about these three components, equity, continuous improvement, and student-centered design, how are we thinking about what we need to shift the burden from students to our institutions? Yes. So I'll paint a picture. In my perfect world, if we had been fully ready for the pandemic, this is, I wish I was dreaming about winning lottery. I'm actually dreaming about how we could have responded better to the pandemic, right? It would have been amazing for us to be able to walk alongside all of those parents who had to homeschool, who had to engage with their children and create lesson plans and try to implement lesson plans and actually credential and support what they were doing in the moment. We weren't ready for that, right? But in my mind, that's my vision is how do we, and we may never get to that perfect world vision or that crazy world vision, depending on, how you view it, but really thinking about as we are shifting burdens, as we are thinking about growing a workforce, as we are thinking about the new economy and what's needed and how we enable and empower individuals to take charge of their own careers and their career mobility. How are we structuring what we do going forward to be able to walk alongside individuals as they are engaging in their learning journey and help them credential, transcript, augment, and enhance that learning journey? That's what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about shifting the burden and being student-centered, is really questioning everything we do in order to be able to show up for students in the ways that they need us to meet them as they're navigating career and life and work and trajectories. When I think about continuous improvement, what I would love to see in the Jamboard is, what have we learned? Not just what do we need right now, but given what we have been through, because I'm sure none of you showed up here today, day one on the job in this industry and in this sector. You all have lived through rounds of investments, new programs coming and going, new legislation coming and going, different changes of leadership on your campus. What have we learned? What have we learned that we should avoid? What have we learned that we should leverage, right? How do we acknowledge and respect and build from what we have been through collectively and individually in order to inform what we are trying to build going forward, right? What worked, what didn't work. And it's not a, we already do that. I always talk about, we already do that t-shirts, we put on that wardrobe. But it's not that we already did that and it didn't work. And it's not that we already do that, right? So just give us more money from it. It's really thinking about, what have I learned from what has happened? And what are some of the things that I have been wrestling with that I need others to wrestle with me in order to shift the structures? And then lastly, when I think about equity in particular, and you all know, I'm sure you all know, this is a huge agenda and a priority agenda for our Chancellor's Office and for our system writ large. As we enter the 5th year of the Vision for Success agenda, and as we look to the May 23rd Board of Governors meeting, we will be giving an update on the progress we've made on the state of this. We'll be giving the state of the system report, which is updates on the progress towards the vision goals. What we know there, what we have learned by looking at the data, is that we have made tremendous progress as a system, but where we have really fallen short is around the equitable outcomes, both regionally and individual student-wise. And so we have to also think about, as we are thinking about structures, new investments, some of what I heard earlier around the politics of who gets money and who doesn't get money and which sectors are at the forefront, wages, really, et cetera, which I am 1000% with you in terms of the structural challenges that are also deeply embedded in the, or tied to or correlated with the composition of who is typically in this workforce, right? And there is a huge equity component to that we have to wrestle with. And so really thinking about, what is our economic development agenda as a collective within this space? Again, we have a moment in time. We need to be thinking about not only how are we creating, I'm going to say, stackable credentials that are actually realized. And I say that intentionally, and I say it with love, right? We create a lot of programming and curriculum, but not all of it is real for students in terms of how they are able to navigate it. But how are we crafting this trajectory so that our students are actually engaging in productive career mobility. And we are, again, walking alongside them all the way through, but also thinking about our own advocacy and collective action around the economic development component of this that really makes this a valued sector in the compensation and investments. I don't have solutions, but I know we need to be wrestling with these issues, particularly given that it structurally impedes our ability to see equitable outcomes for all of our students. And we know that this sector is critical. I put a big heart on my screen, Kathleen, when you were talking about how this is core. These are essential workers. This is at the foundation of everything we do. I couldn't believe that more. And so we really need to be thinking boldly about what we are trying to do as we go forward. So with that, I will stop talking and say thank you for all that you do and for being invested in this and for sharing this space today and for your candid input in those Jam boards. I am really looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. So good to hear your thoughts and good to hear your support of our sector. I also would urge you and any of the other panelists who are getting any hot off the press items from the governor's May revise meetings today that please feel free to share with us. Probably everyone on this symposium would be interested in hearing what some of your findings are. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Tracy has been dropping the Jamboard into the chat. You can also enter your thoughts into the chat directly. But as we move on to our next panel, I'd like you to think about what you've heard so far. Share your ideas. What do our students need? And this, based on what you've heard, how do we grow our own? I think one thing I'd like to lift of what I've heard so far is that my vision is that our own homegrown high school students, our homegrown students in all of our communities, our community college students, our students that grew up serving the communities that they live and work in or go to school in, then populate our classrooms, our childcare centers, our after school programs, that we need to really intentionally grow our own. I have great faith in our students. What do our community colleges need? What do our dual enrollment and high school partners need for this pathway? And what do our transfer partners need? So with those questions, we are going to, this is very funny. So I have this take a break. We'll resume in 5 minutes. We actually won't because we are right on time to start our next panel. So it's a 5-second break actually, but enjoy the Zen rocks for a moment. Enter your items into the Jamboard. And I will be introducing our next panel, and it will be moderated by Renee Marshall, who is on. And Renee, I think it'd be best if you could introduce your panelists and then they can self-introduce. And our next panel has to do with early childhood, TK, EDU, jobs, workforce development, and the pre-3 credential. So I know we've all heard lots about the pre-3 credential. Renee, if you want to take it away.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kathleen. I am so excited to be here today. I'm often the person behind the scenes for our bridging events, and it was so wonderful that Teach LARC and Teach for the Bay were able to pull together and have Kathleen and Steve facilitating and leading us along this journey today. Thank you so much for your leadership and for all that you both continue to do to help train California's teachers. You're both over 20 years of this at this point now, and as somebody who's only 15 years in, I look up to you both as mentors and leaders, and we appreciate you. I'm so happy to be here today. We have a fantastic panel coming up. I was going to spend a few minutes just kind of laying the land a little bit, but honestly, I feel like with what Kathleen said at the beginning, it really set the tone for today. This is absolutely about the teacher workforce, but it's so much larger than that. We think about all the agencies and who help to run our mom and pop childcare centers and help us with licensing and help us think about our leaders. And there's so many spots that we need to be considering right now and having these conversations about. So I'm so grateful that we're here to talk about our new credential that's coming and we have some esteemed guests here with us. I also want to make a point that, or share something that Marty just said that I think is so important. This is about collective action. This is about our groups, our schools, our education systems, our agencies coming together and figuring this out. And today is not a one-stop day. This has to be an ongoing conversation we have in order to make sure that all of our students and all of these future teachers and these candidates have everything they need streamlined as much as possible before we move into this next version of what credentialing is going to look like. I also am so excited too. I just want to give a shout out to my colleagues at the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. I had the opportunity of giving some public comment at the April meeting, and within that public comment, I made 2 requests and I made 2 offers. And I am so proud to say that our colleagues at CTC have literally taken us up on the 2 requests and the 2 offers. And we are in the middle right now of 9 different focus groups with different stakeholders to get information from the field directly about this PK through 3 credential. And I want to invite everybody. I know it's Friday. I know we're at the symposium till 3, but I'm saying it right now. If anyone is interested, the moment the symposium is done, we are going to be going into a focus group specifically about the credential. And anyone who is on today who has capacity to stay on past 3 o'clock, please join us. I will drop the link in the chat later. I don't want to have any confusion right now, so I'm not going to drop it at this moment, but we want to continue the conversation. We want to make sure that our systems are working together to get the voices of the field and that we are transparently moving forward in collective action, as Marty said. So thank you everybody for being here. Before we go into the introduction of our panelists, I do want to share some slides that are in the chat. And this is coming from a colleague at Department of Education. One of our questions has been about where the different funding sources will be available for those students and those future teachers along the pathway. So within these slides that were pulled from a previous event, you're going to see one of the slides focusing on the kind of like diversification and the equity piece of our teacher pipeline and what that looks like. And then the last slide in that set is also going to be about specifically those funding windows and when those funding opportunities hits along the whole spectrum. Michelle, I apologize. I see your message in the chat about the focus group. Our intention was to run it in the middle of the symposium today. And we have been blessed with so many leaders of our industry that are willing to come and speak in this space that it was going to end up being, the focus group was going to be like 20 or 25 minutes. And we know for a fact that that's not enough time to hear everybody. So I apologize that we are moving into kind of an extended, for anybody who wants to jump on from 3 to 4. There's also 2 focus groups that are happening tomorrow. So if there's anybody who's on right now and you can't stay on later in the day, but you'd like to join us tomorrow, just shoot me an email and I will make sure that I send you that information. I will make sure to put my email in the chat in just a moment. But with that, let's go ahead and transition now into our panel. I'm so excited to have this conversation, and I'm so excited that we have leaders from Department of Education on our panel. We have leaders from the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, and we have leaders who have been working with the master plan and our work groups in early childhood education from the very beginning of when this credential first came into discussion, which was quite a long time ago. And so I'm so excited to be here. And I've got to be honest too, as somebody who has been a preschool teacher, as somebody who served as a kindergarten teacher, as somebody who was a professor of education, and as somebody who's been a professor of early childhood education and a chair of early childhood education, I'm thrilled that we're in this moment where suddenly I can be all of those things and it's okay, and it's going to be celebrated. Because I've had times in my career where I've had people say things like, oh, you're not ECE enough. That somehow my years in kindergarten and in preschool didn't somehow you had to be one or the other. And that's not what this is anymore. This is about all of us coming together. And for those people who have the gift of being able to be qualified to be teaching in ECE and EDU, you are the unicorns of our system. You are the people that we need moving forward as we are unifying and figuring out what everything's going to look like moving forward. So thank you everybody for being here and for engaging in these conversations. These are open doors of communication that we want to keep open consistently as we are working through the next few years of our industry sector. So with that, I'm going to start off first by asking my colleagues from Department of Ed to introduce themselves. After our colleagues from Department of Ed, I'm going to ask our colleagues from the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, and then we're going to go to a colleague who has been instrumental in all of this work for many, many years. So Alana, would you mind starting us off with an introduction?
I sure can. However, I'm going to gently pass the ball to Sheila Self to do a bit of introduction and setting us up.
Thank you, Alana. Great to see you, Renee. It's been a while, so thank you for the time together today. My name is Sheila Self, and I'm an education administrator for the California Department of Education System Improvement Office. And so the system conversation that you're having is near and dear to my heart as well. And with me today, I have Alana Penzler. Alana, do you want to take a quick moment to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. Almost afternoon. I am a child development consultant that works with Sheila, and we engage with every and anything having to do with early childhood education and workforce. That is where you will find us.
Okay, CTC.
Excellent. And I have to say too, Sheila, you were the last person I had coffee with before we shut down from the pandemic. And then here's the crazy thing. Alana was the first person I had lunch with once we opened up. Isn't that cool? So I love that you're both here today. Just fantastic to be together today.
A small world for sure.
Let's go
next slide, please.
Renee, do you want us to go ahead and start?
Yes,
it over
please
to
start.
Steve?
I'm
Please
sorry about
start.
that. I was going to ask if we can do the intros from all of ours first. And
understood.
then sorry about that, Kathleen. So Amy and David, would you mind going next? And then we'll have Deborah go, and then we'll click back into Alana and Sheila with slides.
Of course. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, everyone, for inviting us to participate today. We're very pleased to be here with you. I'm Amy Rising, the Chief Deputy Director for the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, and I'll turn it to my colleague, David, to say good morning.
Good morning. I'm David DeGear, and I'm the Director of the Professional Services Division at the Commission.
Outstanding. And let's go ahead and have Deborah introduce herself as well. Thank you so much for being here, Amy and David. Appreciate you.
Hi, I'm Deborah Stipek. I'm an emeritus faculty member from Stanford University. I have absolutely no formal role related to this, but I seem to find myself everywhere.
Love that about you.
I love that on so many levels that you just said that. That is fantastic. But it's the true reality of we all need to be here right now, whether you've got the formal role or not. So thank you so much. Let's go ahead now to our colleagues at Department of Education. Before we get into the panel, we're asking everybody to spend just a few minutes to help ground, and then we're going to get into panel questions.
So I'll start us off. I think everyone knows that we are in a transformative point in time. That there are huge investments being made in the early education system, which is the focus of our work. And I'm so glad to be partnering again with our sister agency, CTC. We have learned more about them, their work, and how we can create that interconnectedness so we can be more successful in supporting the teacher workforce. We know that we need a lot of teachers in order to launch and fully implement universal transitional kindergarten. And so we're approximating about 11,000 new transitional kindergarten teachers, which is a huge number. We know that, and I did sit in on the governor's release today, so I do have some fun and interesting things to share on that. But our California State Preschool program will be expanding. And then the topic of the town is the need for the pre-K to grade 3 credential. So we're just really excited about the expansion of programs for early learning and education, not only with the California Department of Education, but also our sister agency, Department of Social Services. So one nugget I'll share, because I did listen to the governor's release, is that preschool teacher permit with a BA and meets basic requirements enrolled in a program can be the teacher of record in TK that will sunset in 2026. So we hate to promote borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. However, I think the grow your own conversation that I was listening to at the last bit of it really speaks to how to elevate the profession, how to engage with our parents as well, who are also trying to move up in their career. And so our low income families, certainly we want them to have access to education so that they can improve their life outcomes. And we're really excited to be here today with you to talk about all of that.
Thank you for doing our foundation, Sheila. I just want to elevate the idea of the projected demand that Sheila was talking about. You know, California has made some historic changes to early learning policy with the commitment for expanding transitional kindergarten to all 4-year-olds in the state by 25-26. Because TK expansion will require the addition of as many as 11,000 to 16,000 new TK lead teachers and about 25,000 to 26,000 teaching assistants. That's according to latest numbers from the Berkeley Children's Forum. Minimally, just for this year alone, that will probably rough out to about 2,400 teachers able to serve the projected incoming 58,000 new children expected to enroll in this fall. The most important and immediate need is recruitment and retention, but also recruitment and training and retention of qualified staff, especially those lead and assistant teachers that have expertise in child development. As we know, as CTC is currently reviewing the requirements and standards for the PK through 3 ECE specialist credential, and the standalone credential will also provide a bridge for early childhood educators with a bachelor's degree, or perhaps something will pass via the May revision, as Sheila was just talking about. It's the bridge for the ECE educators who have a bachelor's degree with preschool experience to earn that credential, which is highly needed with the expansion of TK.
Mm-hmm.
Just next slide. Now I will share that I made this slide yesterday with January budget numbers, and perhaps there's a lot more gentle inflation that was talked about earlier this morning. But we do know that the budget, the governor is committed, and the governor has been shown some commitment with infusing more funds. There's investment for increasing CSPP adjustment factors to better support students with disability and DLLs. These funds are also for new requirements for state preschool providers to first serve at least 10% students with disabilities, and 2, to provide additional support services for DLLs or dual language learners. All students participating in CSPP will maintain continuous eligibility for 24 months. That's an increase from the 12 months. And after all eligibility of 3- and 4-year-olds are served, CSPP can serve eligible 2-year-old children as a last priority. And we're very happy to see the proposed increases for budgets around TK, including infusion in the infrastructure, which the governor talked about earlier this morning. As of, well, yesterday, the budget proposed about $640 million. We know that number's gone a little bit up to expand eligibility for TK for all children turning 5 years old between September 2nd and December 2nd, for children turning 5 years old between September 2nd and February 2nd, beginning in this upcoming school year, the 2022-23 school year. And these funds will increase the Prop 98 guarantee through the process of rebenching. There's also an additional roughly $400 million from the Prop 98 general fund that's going to be used to add an educator to every TK class to reduce that student to adult ratio and most closely aligned with the state preschool program ratios. There's also funding for expanded learning. We can't do universal pre-K without our expanded learning partners. There's about $3.4 billion for expanded learning rates and expanded learning opportunities program, or ELOP or ELOP, as I've adorably heard it called, to support increased rates from this year for being permitted, and support for that 9 hours of programming in UTK, also for arts and music programming in ELOP. That is setting the stage from CDE.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alana. I also see all the questions coming in the chat. Please absolutely keep putting questions in the chat, putting comments in the chat, using the Jamboards. We're trying to gather as much information and questions from this moment today. So please, please, please continue to use that. Thank you so much, Sheila and Alana. Let's head over to Amy and David for a few moments.
Thank you. So I'm going to start off with a few comments and then turn it to my colleague, David. And yes, please keep putting your questions in the chat. It's really helpful to us to understand your questions so that we can support the effort. So I just wanted to start by saying good morning to all of you and thank you for inviting the commission to present at this symposium. We really appreciate the opportunity to be with you, to hear your questions, and to provide clarifying answers. The commission is working with communities of interest and educational partners to collaboratively update and retool the existing early childhood education specialist credential, as well as develop standards and performance expectations for this credential that prepare programs to respond in order to develop the pathways for this new credential. So it is expected that there will be 3 types of teachers that we need to build pathways for, and you can see those on the slide in front of you. If you want to go back to that. Well, no, go forward, please. So just to take a look at this slide then together, there are 3 types of teachers that we are specifically at this time building pathways for. So teachers who are currently working in the early childhood profession who hold a BA degree in child development. Then our multiple subject credential teachers who seek the credential to meet school funding requirements, that they hold 24 units of early childhood education or the equivalent in order to teach in TK. And then finally, new teachers, brand new educators who want to join the profession and who are seeking to work in the 3 to 3 space. So 3 particular types of educators, and we are looking for pathways to support all of these educators to be able to work in the early childhood space. So the commission appointed a broadly representative work group of early childhood educator experts and multiple subject teachers, employers, 2- and 4-year faculty in child development and teacher education and others to advise us on this work. And we were able to work with them in the months of January and February. And then for those of you following this, know that there was an item brought forward in April that provided information about the work of this work group. In addition to that set of findings that the experts brought forward for consideration by the commission, we then embarked on additional work. And as Renee pointed out, part of that work was moving into a whole series of focus groups to continue to gather feedback. And in addition to those focus groups, we've had 3 surveys in the field, and many of you have responded, and we so appreciate the fact that you took the time to respond. So we've had surveys in the field looking at our teaching performance expectations that are under development and will be brought forward in our June commission meeting, looking at the program standard revisions that are being put forth to support these new PK to 3 programs. And then finally, requirements. What would the requirements be for this credential that we are bringing forward to support the growth and development in this work area? So with that, we're going to move on to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it to my colleague David to talk to you a little bit about the timeline that we're moving through and following to be able to support the field for this change. David?
Thanks, Amy. So at our next commission meeting, which will be on June 16th and 17th, we will be bringing to the commission the teaching performance expectations, or TPEs, for the new credential, the program standards for preparation programs leading to this new credential, as well as requirements for earning the credential. And next slide, please. So if the commission adopts the program standards and TPEs and credential requirements, the next steps will include The standards and TPEs will be circulated to all of our accredited IHEs with an invitation to them to develop programs that address the standards. And that could come in one of several possible forms: integrated undergraduate credential programs, post-baccalaureate degree programs, and intern pathways. Please note that there is likely to be funding in the 22-23 budget to support at least the integrated pathway. And we've been working with the Department of Finance and the offices of legislators to make sure that that funding will apply for this updated, retooled credential. So if the commission approves of the standards and TPEs, they will direct us to begin the regulatory process, which means that we will be bringing to the commission in the August 25th, 26th meeting a set of regulations to be adopted. And we are hoping to bring these regulations as a set of emergency regulations so that they would take effect in the fall. And that would make it a lot easier for our preparation programs to know what they need to work with and get started on those, because we need them as soon as possible.
Thank you so much, David and Amy. Dr. Stipek, would you have anything that you'd like to share right now?
I do. I was asked to say something about the master plan and the work on the P3 credential from the perspective of a participant. So just the idea of a P3 teacher credential predates the master plan. Many of us, including some of you, I can see in these rectangles here, have been thinking and talking about this for a very long time. But with regard to the master plan, workforce issues, including preparation for all ages and in every setting, was a central concern of the people who were working on the plan. But I think it was the move to universal preschool recommended by the master plan that really pushed the idea forward. It put in clear relief the shortcomings of a multiple credential in preparing people to work with young children, and the need for preparation that focused on developmentally appropriate practice, as Mary mentioned, which we hope we will be able to achieve through the P3 credential. In our conversations in the master plan, I want to say that the importance of a diverse and well-prepared workforce was constant, and pay. And I do not think there was a single conversation that the issue of low pay was not brought up. I'm not sure whether we have a solution, but it was certainly on the table. A lot of thought was given to how to make it feasible for people who have to work to achieve the competencies that are deemed important for educators of young children, that are now those competencies that are now documented in the new P3 teacher performance expectations. So in addition to financial support, we discussed things like online learning, courses held in local communities, stackable units, micro-credentials, and so on. The community college was also always assumed to be a major, if not a predominant pathway to a career in ECE, including for those who obtain a P3 credential. The work group that has been working on the P3 credential hasn't focused specifically on the role of community colleges, partly because these are issues that need to be developed within higher ed. But everyone in the group, I think, recognizes that this is likely to be the major pathway. We did talk about ways to make sure maximum credit is given to community college courses and experiences toward the credential. But needless to say, there are a lot of details to work out. And most of these will be made by higher education institutions. So one of the things we all need to do is make sure that community college faculty are at the table in those discussions. As you know, partnerships between CSUs and community colleges already exist, but we've also had conversations about how to facilitate the development of these partnerships, because we're going to need more of them, specifically focused on the P3 credential. One of the members of the P3 work group, Linda Plattis, actually created a mock-up of what a 2+2 P3 course plan might look like. She combined courses that are already on the books in Skyline Community College and in the Child and Adolescent Department and the Multiple Subjects program at San Francisco State. Then she added a few that didn't exist. This is not to say that this is what people should do. It was just an exercise to show that you could create a coherent 4-year P3 credential program with a major in child development that begins in community college. It seems to me like we could create some other resources like this to facilitate the 2 and 4 year college partnerships that will lead to coherent pathways for students. So one thing we need to do, and I'm going to repeat what Marty Alvarado said, we need to make sure that legislators know that new funding is going to be needed to create P3 programs and to support them in the long run. The CTC plays a major role in designing and monitoring credential programs, but funding comes from the legislation. So as Marty asked you, please use your voice and clout to make sure legislators understand the importance of this. This is going to be a very big lift and require some changes in both 4 and 2 year institutions, changes that can't be made and sustained without additional resources. So let's go get them.
I love
Thank
it.
you,
That's
Deborah.
exactly my kind of attitude. I love that. That was great. We do need to go get them. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I really appreciate it. And now we get the opportunity to go into our questions. And these are the questions we have up here. They're coming directly from the field. They're coming from, we wanted to get it as close as possible. We also have the Jamboard. So if anybody who's listening right now, who's on and participating, wants to comment about these questions, please do so in the chat or the Jamboard. But let's go ahead now and start with, right at the beginning here. What do our students need? So what do the candidates, what are the future educators, what do our students need? And Kathleen, can we take off the slide so that way we can see all the participants a little bit more?
Sure. So consider these questions. We have about 10 minutes for this particular part of the activity. And if I can just add 2 things that I'm seeing in the chat. One is that our higher ed partners are also very concerned about the CDSS expansion in childcare other than CDE. So we've got lots of expansion going on in the state. Not all is through the California Department of Education. We have a need for family childcare, for licensed childcare center staff, in a range of programs. And I also want to lift exempt care providers. They're caring for 40% of our children in California, and they also need access to community college and higher ed training and coursework. So all of this is in our level of responsibility in higher ed, and it's a lot to take in. So I will stop the share, and we can, you can enter into your Jamboard, and please, Renee, you're going to facilitate a few questions.
I absolutely am. I'm a little thrown off right now because the questions that are on the slide are not the exact questions that we sent to all of our panelists. So I'm going to put our version in the chat just because the last thing I want to do is give questions on the spot that people were not asked to prepare for. A lot of them are really similar though. So again, this is all about total transparency, everybody. We're all figuring this out. So let's go ahead and start with, where are the teachers going to come from?
And I'll do a 2-minute warning when it's time.
Perfect. And we're good till 12:35, right? Because that's what we have for us around. You'll give us a warning. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So who would like to start off first? Where, we know we have a huge need for teachers. So where will we get them? Where are they going to come from? Who would like to reflect first?
Well, what I can offer is in terms of, we really are looking at our current early childhood workforce, those individuals that have a bachelor's degree and would be able to access the pathway toward a teaching credential. It's in the language that we have, it has been always referenced as a multi-subject credential, but really the focus in the work at CDE is around preschool to grade 3, and that the credential is what is going to lift up the competencies for individuals working within this space. There's folks with a lot of experience. There are folks that have teacher permits that have been doing fantastic work. And we also know that in terms of our educators in the early education space, that 70% of those individuals are people of color, and predominantly, as we all know, women of color. We have over 85,000 in centers and over 31,000 with a bachelor's degree in early childhood education, based on the study of childcare employment from 2021. So those are opportunities in terms of fast tracking some folks in order to meet the needs that will be emerging over the next couple of years.
Thank you so much. One of the things that's been really surprising to me in the focus groups is how many of our early childhood professionals already have master's degrees. And so thinking about those with masters, how do we have that pathway available and easily, expedited as much as possible? So I love the conversation, because I think it's kind of unpackaging things more and more. And I think David's going to reflect on this question a little bit next.
Yeah, and following along what Sheila said, one of the questions we've gotten is, so many of the teachers who are currently working with 4-year-olds would love to move into the TK-12 system. Why can't they? They're already doing it this year. And so the local assignment option that Sheila talked about that just dropped in the May revised budget would allow someone who holds both a child development permit at the teacher level or higher and a bachelor's degree to be the teacher of record in TK if they're enrolled in a preparation program. So another reason why we need to move quickly on developing these preparation programs so that we can have those internships ready to go. With the new credential, people who have a degree in child development or early childhood education who may not be working in a preschool right now would be prime candidates for getting into a 5th-year program to learn the pedagogy of working with that age group and getting a credential. But, have to be realistic that we do have teacher shortages across the board, and this is going to be very challenging. And so the idea of grow your own has been something that I've long supported and found to be very valuable, because you're finding people who already live in the community, who are already committed to the community, and those are the people who are more likely to stay. So I think those are our options. I think we need to look at how we set up high school programs, career academies, to get our high school students ready to take, become first level teacher assistants. And then I think another wonderful opportunity is residencies in TK. Because of the required staffing of having a master teacher and another adult in the room, a resident could be that second adult in the room and provide a really rich and wonderful learning opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you so much, David. Is there any of the other panelists that would like to reflect on this before we go to our next question? Okay, let's go ahead and transition. So what needs to ramp up in terms of recruitment, preparation, and transfer? So what needs to ramp up in terms of recruitment, preparation, and transfer? Who would like to start us off on that one?
Deborah, you're an expert in this area. Would you like to go first?
Well, I'm hardly an expert. I've been in a lot of meetings and heard a lot of conversation about this. I think one thing that I suggest is that people in higher ed, in the various programs that would be involved in a P3 credential, start talking to each other. And I know that some of these conversations are already going on, to think about or consider the strategies they might take to create a coherent program. In 4-year colleges, the current multiple credential, the people who are used to working with CDC, who are used to supervising in the long-term student teachers, are in one department or school, and the people who are supporting the learning of in child development or early childhood education are typically in another department. Well, we need both of those very clearly, and there needs to be coordination between those, and we need to create those seamless, coherent pathways between community college and four-year colleges. So I hope that you're beginning to reach out to your colleagues and have these conversations, because this will take a while.
Yeah. I would just add to that, that there's going to need to be a lot of supports provided to this incoming group and cohort of students and learners. They will need to have that clear pathway established, and it will take time to create these pathways, but it does have to be in terms of advising students, in terms of making sure that they are on track. We want to make sure that they are fully supported. These may be individuals, again, I just want to highlight that these may be individuals that really can be life-changing with their education and development in this space. In terms of pay, which is always an issue. But we also need some flexible coursework and flexible times. A lot of the individuals that are going to be accessing extended learning will be working. And so to consider about, what hours are being offered, times of day, and really understanding the diversity and community partnerships that it will take in order to fully implement. The other thing I think is really important, and this is kind of a piece of the COVID experience we've all gone through, is really retention. Don't forget about retention. That's such an important piece, and I think sometimes it's being not considered as heavily as I think it probably should be. And that we need to have a teacher initiative that goes beyond STEM. Once again, in the governor's budget, there is a lot of funding coming down for STEM, for teacher preparation, which is all good. But when we think about STEM, and I think about those engineers and mathematicians, they're going to need some level of early education and childcare and preschool programming. I don't know how we get a C in there or E, another E, because sometimes they'll add the A for STEAM for arts. But we need to be a part of that picture, because one thing doesn't happen without the other in terms of community, families, et cetera. So the final comment I will make is we need to be thinking about leadership. Those principals, those individuals that will be supervising programs and their need for professional development, increasing competencies. So I think that's going to be another area of growth for us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sheila. And I want to address some of the things I'm seeing in the chat. First off, this is not an us against them, everybody. This is not about our early childhood workforce not being prepared enough to be in the K-12 workforce. So, and please don't get stuck on words. It's a person who's saying something in this moment. Maybe it's not the exact proper declaration, but we're here together to take action together. So the turf stuff, we've got to figure this out, because it's been happening for so many years and it can't work moving forward. So let's also remember that every single speaker who's on today is a human being, and they might not say the right exact word or whatnot, but the intention is that we're trying to figure this out, and we're all coming together to try and figure it out. I also do want to mention about a couple other things that I quickly saw in the chat. Denise, I agree with you 100% about the community college system and trying to get curriculum in place and it taking a year. And so our systems will have to switch and figure out other ways. in order to expedite and to make things work smoothly for us. So I just want to acknowledge what I'm seeing in the chat and make sure that people know we are recording everything that is there, and we will be diving as deep as we can into it, because the more that we have, the more information that we have, the better off our cohesive moving forward is going to be. I want to move to our next question now, which is talking about advising, which Sheila actually started mentioning early in her points here. But how can education systems serve the advising needs of our students within the anticipated changes? And I know in the chat there was already a concern going, faculty don't have release time for this. So like, how do we do that? So anybody who'd like to reflect on that concept of how do we advise with clarity across systems on this?
Well, I know that one piece that CDE and CTC have been discussing and can create some confusion, and then David, you can clarify this further, is to ensure that we really are looking at credit-bearing units from regionally accredited programs. Sometimes there is some confusion about professional development, somehow substituting or in place of, but what we need to focus on is those are the credit-bearing units, and that we need to have LEA credential specialists brought in for the consistency in messaging and making sure we're all speaking from the same song sheet. So David, I know that's been a topic of our conversation. You may want to elaborate on that as well.
Yeah, so one thing that was in the governor's original January 10th budget, and as far as we know, still in May revise, was to create a unit at the commission with what we've been calling career counselors. Because over time, it used to be 20 years ago, there was one way to get a credential. It was 5th year. After you had majored in one of the credential areas, then you learned how to teach the pedagogy, you passed the exams, and then you were credentialed. Well, now there are so many options. Even just the basic skills requirement, there are at least 8 different options for meeting that requirement. And there are so many different pathways as well. There's the traditional student teaching undergraduate, or the traditional student teaching pathway. There's residency. There's the integrated undergrad. There's internships. So the question now is, what is the best pathway for me, given where I am, the education and experience I already have? So these positions will be the kind, I think, to help meet the need of advising in terms of understanding what the requirements are, what they may have met already, and where they can go for additional information. And we do hope to work very closely with advising staff at community colleges, at 4 years, at LEAs, so that there are consistent messages, as Sheila has said. But the other thing is, it's going to take time, because not only do we have a retooled credential here, this is the first time we're going to have credentials that have overlapping authorizations. So the multiple subjects credential will continue to authorize service in as low as pre-kindergarten, but this new retooled PK3 early childhood education specialist is going to be really focused on that critical grade span, age level, and how instruction and learning needs to be different than in the upper levels. So it's going to be a lot of education for a lot of different people.
And just to pick up that thread, David, we're really promoting developmentally informed teaching practice, so that we understand that the early education experience doesn't stop at K, but that we are still providing education to young children that really need developmental informed practices and instruction. Children are experts in play. That doesn't stop once they leave preschool. So we want to utilize their strength in terms of providing additional supports and scaffolding for them.
I love that you just said that, Sheila, because one of my dreams is that what's happening in this moment is going to help to developmentalize K-12. Because I was a developmentalist when I was a K-12 teacher, and I'm trained as an administrator as well. And so there's such, I just see such potential there. Another thing too, we were talking about the messaging and just getting the word across, and where will the teachers come from? I want to put one idea in everybody's mind right now. We need more people to consider the field. And so, you know, a lot of times people consider teaching as the plan B, like a backup plan. Let's create a statewide marketing campaign that's called Teaching is My Plan A. And let's have billboards all along all of our major freeways. And let's see how many people start considering education as being a plan A as opposed to a backup plan. We need to have those type of investments that literally you're physically driving on the 5. And you know, when you keep seeing those billboards about the water and the farmers, and you're like, imagine if you're like teachers. Oh, wow, teachers. Oh, I never thought about the work. I never thought about joining that. We need to have that even type of message. Talk about grow your own and grassroots. That's the kind of stuff we need to do. So our next question I'd like to move into is, and we only have about 7 more minutes together for this part of the day, but what resources will support our students and our candidates? Because I'm using both words, because depending on who you are, you use a different term, which we're working on shared terminology, which I also love too. But what resources will support students and candidates who have additional barriers, such as community college students? And we want to keep this real. What do we do when we've got a current preschool, early childhood professional who's in the field, and they're a single mom, and they've got 3 kids, and they currently have an AA? How do we get them to the next step? And they're working 3 jobs, because our community college population looks pretty different than some of their other populations. And some of the barriers are so incredibly significant that we don't want people to automatically go, oh, I can't even consider this field. So what do we do when we have students and candidates that have heavy barriers, heavy weights on them? And I'm going to see if Deborah, if you wouldn't mind starting us off on this one. Sorry, I didn't mean to like put you on the spot there, but I was hoping we could hear from you a little bit more. And you are muted right now. This is the humanity part of the Zoom. It's like we're a couple years into it and I'm still muted half the time too. There we go. Excellent.
Yeah. Well, one, I gotta say, I love the idea of a billboard campaign. But we also have to think about pay and issues that are real, and the real reasons why some people are not going into teaching. And we have to make sure, I think, we make sure that the folks who are there are supported and can take pleasure and pride in their work. So I know many teachers, pay is one of the reasons why people leave the field, but working conditions are another. I just want to go back to what these are some random thoughts that I've been saving up. I want to go back to one of the comments that was made in the chat about school leaders needing to be trained in early childhood education. I really want to reinforce that idea, because we've done research on districts that have had preschool on the campuses under the principal. And in the districts that really invested in supporting principals and their learning about early childhood education through seminars, through doing walkthroughs with the early learning specialists in the district and that sort of thing, those principals were deeply engaged and took responsibility for instructional leadership in the transitional kindergarten and in the pre-K. In the districts where it was haphazard or very little, clearly not a priority, most of those principals basically said to us, I don't know early childhood. I mean, I don't want to say ignore it, but I kind of let them do their thing. And so those early childhood programs, whether they're pre-K or even TK, really didn't have the kind of supervision and support that they deserve, because they no longer had a pre-K preschool director the way they do if they're separate from the elementary school. So the importance of bringing school leaders into this whole space, I would highly advocate for early childhood having to be part of the principal training program and for their credential. And that's something that I think CTC could actually press for.
Deborah, I love that. That is something that we've heard from the focus groups repeatedly, is the necessity of having administrators have at least foundational understanding of early childhood education. And somebody even brought up the idea of having an administrator boot camp where it could be, you know, a couple days and have it be like really intense, and just consistently across as many of our districts as possible. So I appreciate you saying that. Who actually, as
Renee, I just think that's a great idea that you just lifted up. Because, you know, when we're talking about developmentally informed early education, you know, one notion that I've heard is we don't do play, right? And so I think there's a real necessity. When you know better, you can do better, right? And there's a real necessity for that kind of, you know, just orientation to the work. The experts and the leaders are in the classroom doing the work, but to have their principals and supervisors really understanding and valuing that, I think that's an issue that can certainly be addressed at the local level and within the LEA context, County Office of Ed context at this point. There's work to be done there.
And the state, I mean, the state could create some institutes. One of the small districts don't have the resources to be able to create training for their 5 elementary school principals. So I think this is something that the state could do.
I love that you said that. And I'm going to throw something else out here with what Sheila just said. You talked about play, Sheila. I think as a state, we need, and I'm not equating play with recess. Those are 2 different things.
Yeah, that's totally different. Yeah.
But recess is a time for unstructured opportunities for students in an outdoor space. So I'll call it that instead of play, right? Can we get a rule going that recess and lunch are no longer allowed to be taken away from children? Because the fact that that's still a penalty for 5 and 6-year-olds, like, you're not doing well, so you got to sit down during the 15 minutes you're allowed to move. There are things within our systems that we can, or trends in our system that we can change. That is one that we should absolutely change. And again, that's outside of play, but that recess time, that's sacred. That's not a privilege.
That's a decompression for young children to go out and run it off, you know.
Teachers don't let kids go to the bathroom or get a drink of water. Really? Like, we need to change some of those practices and pull in these developmental norms of what children need as much as possible. And especially post-pandemic with everything that's happened, we were absolutely concerned about the academic gap. Let's talk now about the social gap. Let's talk about our 5th graders acting like 3rd graders and how do we deal with all that? I mean, there's just so much. And I know we're getting very close to the end.
30 seconds.
Oh, 30 seconds. Oh, okay.
Yeah, very close.
Okay, very close. Okay, last one. We'll have 1 or 2 people respond quickly. And just so everybody knows, this is the beginning of the discussion on this question. This is not the end of the discussion on this last question. This one honestly could have its own symposium. What's funding going to look like along a student or a candidate's pathway? Can anybody address that quickly?
We have $100 million coming out to support teacher workforce through a teacher development grant. And I'll let David talk about the opportunities there.
So there are classified staff grants for districts that can be used not only to help a classified staff member get credential, but also move from their associate degree to a bachelor degree, because that's often a place where there isn't generally funding available. So I would say that that's probably the best funding available from the commission right now.
Anyone else who'd like to reflect on this? Okay, one thing I do want to throw out here with our community college students, there's a belief that community college is always free because we have our Promise programs now. It's imperative to know that that's not all of our students, first of all, and that even though the cost of units might be reasonable, the cost of living while you are a community college student is not in California. And so we always need to be thinking of that. Also, as we wrap here, though, I just want to give a shout out to what Donna Cecil just said in the chat a few minutes ago. ECE should be required for all future teachers, regardless of the grade they will eventually teach. It is foundational knowledge. So again, what Donna just said goes along with my dream of developmentalizing, which I don't even know if that's a word. I'm making it a word. Developmentalizing our entire education systems. Imagine if we even developmentalize our 4 years and our community colleges as well. Anyways, thank you so much for the honor of talking with you today. I appreciate it. Thank you, Kathleen, for creating the space for this panel and for just all of us coming together today. I just want to give a shout out to everybody who was on a panelist. And I also want to give a shout out to everybody who's communicating in the chat and on the Jamboard right now. Communication is key right now. And it's about us sticking together as much as possible. Remember what Marty said? This is collective action, everybody. So thank you so much. I will hand it over to Kathleen.
Thank you. We are having a 30-second break, and I built in 5 minutes. They're not turning into 5 minutes. So just take a really quick break. We will come back, and our next set of panelists have to do with the extended learning workforce, not just having to do with the ACES and ELOP funds from CDE, but also the whole workforce in general. So we're going to take a look at that. So quick break, and I am going to get our slides back up. And thank you so much. Again, enter your comments into the Jamboard.
I'm lost.
Okay, that was a fast break. I would like to welcome Alea Rosario and Jeff Davis. They can further introduce themselves, but they will be talking to us about the expanded learning workforce, what's on the horizon, and I'm going to let you both self-introduce. Tell me when you want me to advance slides. And Jeff and Alea, are you ready to go?
Yeah, I think so.
Ready?
Welcome.
Great. Thanks, Kathleen. And it's great to be here with you all and just be a part of the additional conversations. I'm Alea Rosario. I'm with the Partnership for Children and Youth. We provide advocacy and capacity building for the expanded learning fields across California. And before I turn it over to Jeff, we are really excited to be here today. I've spoken and interacted with many of you over the last few years, but talking about increased investments, the opportunity ahead here in this state to really invest in pipelines and pathways for young adults, people of color, women of color, is just really supported by an existing strong infrastructure of the expanded learning field. And so I'll pass it over to Jeff. You can introduce yourself. You can probably advance the slide to our names and contact info. And then Jeff, you can take it away and give us some foundational information about the field.
Sure. And again, also echoing that gratitude. It's wonderful to be here with each and every one of you. And thanks for those that were troubleshooting to help me actually get in here, as I was, I think, inadvertently kicked off before. But I'm Jeff Davis. I'm with the California After School Network. We're part of the system of support for expanded learning in California. And yeah, just one of the things that Kathleen brings up, and it's important to note that a lot of what I'm going to share in terms of my remarks might pertain to expanded learning, but also might pertain to childcare, might pertain to fee-based youth development programs, and all sorts of youth serving settings. So I just wanted to sort of bring that up, that this is broadly applicable. And maybe we can take a look at the next slide, just in terms of expanded learning. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. California has always been the envy of the nation in terms of its strong infrastructure for expanded learning. And that infrastructure is growing. But for those of you that don't know, expanded learning programs are characterized by certain quality standards, and they happen before school, after school, intersession, during the summer, and any of those times when school is not in session. And let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. As I'd mentioned before the pandemic, BC, we were the envy of the nation, and in those 4,500 sites, as Alea will share, just quite an expansive workforce, and it's expanding even greater now post-pandemic. I'll just give you a sense. I was just on with my leadership team at the California After School Network. One leadership team member was expressing a 300% increase in staffing. Another leadership team member was saying that they're hustling, literally passing things out on the streets and saying, meet us in the library for a quick interview, and hiring people literally off the streets to come and work in programs. People are out there hustling, but I'm glad to be here to be sort of talking about some of the systemic solutions to these workforce challenges as well. Let's take a look at the next slide. We've also known for quite a while that our workforce is representative of the students that they serve. So perfect partners to develop that next level of our diverse teaching core as well. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. But that system, as I described before, is described there in those orange bars, in the orange bar to the left. Since the pandemic and everything that's come with that, we've seen incredible investment in expanded learning in the form of a one-time expanded learning opportunities grant, and now in the budget, 1.75 billion on top of that orange bar to the left. And the May revise just came out today, and that is scheduled to grow to 4.5 billion. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. And our projections at 4.4 were even lower than what actually did come out in the May revise, which was a bit higher than that. So this is, for example, in Oakland Unified, one of our leadership team members was sharing today, every single elementary school in Oakland Unified will have an expanded learning program. So that's the impact of this funding and what it can mean for our communities, but this rapid expansion is going to require some real work to recruit and retain a high quality workforce. Let's see, is that my last slide? Yes, it is. So I will turn it back to Alea.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, so our next kind of piece that we want to talk about is what we know about the expanded learning workforce, and maybe the bolded question should be what we don't know about the expanded learning workforce that makes it challenging, but also presents even greater opportunities for partnership with you all. As Jeff said, we think the estimated number of workers pre-COVID in expanded learning was 30,000. That source down at the bottom is back of the napkin math you will, multiplying the number of sites that are funded by our publicly or by our public funds that support expanded learning, multiplied by 6 staff per site. Next slide. Kathleen helped us think about, is this number actually closer to 60,000 if we are including, as Jeff said, private providers, license exempt, other youth development programs that are not funded by state and federal funding for expanded learning, which means there's an invisible workforce, right? That's hard to track, that we don't actually know about. And then a recent estimate I heard was that this number of workers is going to be could be closer to 200,000 at full expanded learning opportunities program implementation. Those are big numbers for sure, and put a lot of urgency under coming up with strategies for recruitment, for retention, for linking to pathways into teaching and so forth. And another big issue is this issue of data. And we don't have good, consistent, accurate data of who our workforce is, let alone how many workers we have. We've worked with Kathleen on leveraging some of the resources that are available in the community college system with the centers of excellence to do some labor market studies. Some of the more recent studies in the past couple of years in LA and the Bay Area on the education sector kind of highlight, tutors, youth development specialists, and so on, probably encompass this expanded learning workforce. But there's just a lot of variance in how different employers and providers code their workers. So it makes it very difficult for us to have this accurate number. When it comes to a systems kind of solution, maybe a big North Star for all of us is finally addressing the federal standard occupational classification code, re-examining, is there a code that more fully represents this workforce and what they do, or do we need to create a new one or just modify? But we know that we will need systemic kind of advocacy and collaboration to be able to influence how we collect data about this workforce. Because if it truly is even somewhere between 60 and 200,000, that is significant. And think about how many of those workers want to become educators, and that could give us a lot more, data and influence to create those pathways. Next slide. So, Jeff already shared the power and the diversity of this workforce, and it's worth highlighting again. 69% of our workforce are people of color, which means that they represent the children and youth in their communities that they serve, and presents, again, a huge opportunity to diversify the teaching workforce for those that want to become teachers. You can also see their education levels. So they're, this workforce is educated. They are enrolled in college. They have some college experience, which means you all are seeing and touching our workforce, right? And how can we figure out how to better partner between the students that come through and are in the community college system that need to be and can be connected to work. And then, some of these other data points toward the bottom, that 90% of workers that are employed by some of the biggest employers in the state are bilingual, another huge asset. And that 78% live in the communities they serve, again, meaning they know the families, they know the young people. This truly, expanded learning truly should be a part of grow your own efforts, because that's who our workforce is. Next slide. One of the exciting efforts that is happening at this time to address some of the data challenges is this Power of Us, which is a national youth fields survey. And you can go to the next slide. And I will put the link to the chat in just a moment. This kind of survey has never been done at the national level. It's designed to collect stories and experiences from workers in the field, not only in the expanded learning or after school space, but literally any occupation that interacts with young people in the direct service way. So we are trying to collect, stories and data from librarians to the people that work just during the summer in camps, to the school-age childcare workforce, to the volunteers that volunteer for a tutoring program. So this survey will be open through the end of this year. So there will be several waves of kind of recruitment and outreach around this. And this would be a really great tangible thing that you all can do and share with your students. If they work with youth in some way, have them complete the survey. What I really love about this survey is that as much as it is focused on, collecting the quantitative information, there's a lot of investment in hearing the stories and putting the faces of the workforce on campaign materials and so on. And so the other really exciting thing about this survey is that the survey data will be open source. So we as a state will get back data. We can use it to design and develop programs and policies, and also it will be open source. So it could be something that you all also access to understand, who the workforce is, what their career pathways are, what PD they receive, what their wages are, and so on. Once again, it's never been done before. I'll make sure to share more information in the chat about this as one way to address the question of what don't we know about this workforce. All right, pass it back to you, Jeff.
All right, let's take a look at the next one. I have often said, and we can advance to the next slide, Kathleen. Or now I think we need to go. Do we need to go back one? There we go. I have often said that if you can be a successful expanded learning site coordinator, there's really not a lot you can't do. If you think about the role of that particular individual, right, that they're grounded in child and youth development, they support a variety of staff members, they coordinate with families and principals, they arrange lesson plans and materials, and they're consistently working together and collaborating and problem solving, which are skills that really are translatable across multiple fields. We also know that this is a large system that is going to be available to really from every local education agency perspective. And so it makes it really ripe for partnership with the community colleges and other higher education institutions to really help high school students enter a pathway, perhaps through volunteerism, perhaps through pre-apprenticeship or internship. We can look at what does it look like to earn college credit to participate in to work in these programs, and what does it look like to create sort of an apprenticeship pathway through a community college, and then what does it look like to create intentional pathways through other higher education institutions into not only the expanded learning field, but you could move from working in the expanded learning field to being that site coordinator, to providing technical assistance in the field, to working in a school district. There's a variety of places you can go within the expanded learning field, but the competencies that you learn also prepare you well to become a teacher. The competencies that you learn can also help do a lot of other things. I'll just offer one example that I heard recently, that in Santa Ana Unified School District, one of the things that they're doing to make this sound a lot more appealing to folks is that they've created a position that leverages some investment in restorative justice and restorative practices, and their expanded learning funds to offer individuals full-time work to do restorative practices in the school day, and then to be employed in the expanded learning program, right? It could look similarly on a teacher pathway. What does it look like if you're doing some of your student teaching and or working with your apprentice leader in the core instructional day and then working in an expanded learning program? So there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration and partnership with the expanded learning ecosystem to create a variety of pathways into a lot of human service careers, including education. Let's take a look at the next slide. Because, right, as I'd mentioned, the competencies that we develop and the competencies to implement a high quality expanded learning, youth development, child care program, the competencies of working together to accomplish these types of things on a site level are broadly applicable and can be sort of transported into other professions, and of course to help us address our own sort of worker shortage as well in the expanded learning field. Let's take a look at the next one. I always like to share this because I had a chance to discuss some of this with Linda Darling Hammond, who, as many of you know, is our State Board of Education president. And I'd actually asked her as a panelist one time during a conference during the days when we used to actually go to those things. She just mentioned, oh yeah, no, I see the pathway. I actually got my start in education in an urban after school program. So I worked with her to cultivate a quote that we could share with the field, right? That you can get your start in expanded learning or in after school, and you can become the State Board of Education president in California. So that just to illustrate the power and potential of those pathways and the capacities and passion that are cultivated in expanded learning employment. Next slide, please. But right, this is going to take some deep work, working together at local and state levels. And I think, you know, I think I'll just sort of leave it there and turn it back to Alea to offer some real great examples of some things that actually are in process right now and some things that we can build on, because we're not starting from scratch.
Great, thanks. Next couple of slides, probably. So there are growing linkages between expanded learning, early childhood education, and pathways into teaching. Next slide. So, I mean, as it's come up in the chat already, right, that between the investments in all of these systems and, you know, the similarity of competencies, the similarity of workforce kind of recruitment pools, and think about the need for families and their children also, right? Like we have the opportunity to create a full day, full year continuum of care that's seamless for families. And that isn't going to go without challenges for sure. So we know already that expanded learning providers and the expanded learning workforce will need additional training and professional development to work with younger children. Most expanded learning programs, you know, are elementary age, and we hear from the field, we have started to hear from the field, you know, their expertise is not with littles, is not with TK or K. There's more being built around that. And I don't think we need to create any more training in PD. We just need to make sure that people have access to them. And you all are a good partner in being able to provide some of that training in PD. We definitely need to strengthen the collaboration with ECE in their workforce recruitment efforts. I think it was in the chat as well. You know, we're trying to recruit the same people, right? Or we're trying to recruit from similar communities and similar populations. And so as we're putting up billboards, right, for becoming a teacher, working in education, there's a whole lot of entry points, right, that we can make clear to people, and expanded learning or work in expanded learning can certainly be one of them, as is work in ECE and early learning. And then we know that as more investments come out around pathways to teaching, whether they're residencies, grow your own, we need to ensure that expanded learning is included, or the expanded learning workforce has access to these programs, to funding, and so on. So those are some of the ways that, you know, we're already sort of in motion and in place that we need to just build on, or just give us more incentive to work together on these issues. Next slide. We've said this a couple of times, but again, worth kind of visualizing and ensuring that this group kind of can hold this as we work together and build partnerships. You know, what teacher candidates need on the left-hand side, they need classroom experience. They get that by working in expanded learning. They need paid opportunities. We know that that's a barrier to a lot of workers who want to become teachers or educators, is having to quit their job, right? It was in the chat. So they need paid opportunities to work with children and youth, ideally. They need mentorship, they need practicum, they need hours, right? And more, educators need to have experience and competencies in engaging with communities and families, and exposure to different grades and different roles. You get all of that experience with all of that in expanded learning. Particularly, some of the work that Jeff's organization did was kind of look side by side the expanded learning competencies and TPEs. And one of the areas that kind of was highlighted that you get more of, or oftentimes maybe a better experience in expanded learning, is that working with families and engaging with families and communities. So that's something to think about, again, as sort of more incentive to partner, to work together, to figure out how work in expanded learning can count toward those practicum or clinical hours needed. From earlier in the pipeline, you know, how we ensure that future teachers are getting paid work experience in an expanded learning program. You know, we can look all along the work-based learning continuum and find points where expanded learning can be, you know, can be a valued experience for these future educators. Next slide. So what are the pathways, pipelines, and partnerships needed? Lots to think about here. Next slide. And maybe I'll just say again, you know, thinking about this work-based learning, you know, continuum from career, you know, exploration to career practice, there's opportunities for partnership. What we like to do is take a look back, or just recognize that this work has not just started. You know, we have years of piloting, of practicing, of experimenting. One for sure, want to mention the California Teaching Fellows Foundation that was founded back in 1999. It was a partnership with the Kremen School of Education at Fresno State. They employ college enrolled students to work in the after school programs in districts all across the Central Valley. They're still in operation and probably provide one of the greatest models for partnership with institutions of higher ed at scale. In 2007, there's a UC Irvine developed a certificate in after school and summer education that included you know, work experience and partnership with after school providers in the area. It's worth mentioning also, and Kathleen helped us to do this crosswalk, I think there were probably 30 or so community colleges that offer certificates in school-age childcare or youth development. And so for sure, if your college is one of those, who are your employer partners, and how can you all partner? And then a couple of other examples, right, of either state investments or privately, supported projects that really understood and invested in the linkages between community colleges, CSUs, and after school work. Next slide. This is just a model of, I mentioned California Teaching Fellows Foundation. This is a great visual of, again, the various points where an expanded learning provider like the Teaching Fellows can support someone along their pathway, starting from high school, right? And offering, training and engaging high school students to be summer interns or even year-round interns, especially while they're in a dual enrollment program, to community college, and through their graduation from a four-year institution, they get about 30 plus hours of paid professional development a year as they're continuing their coursework and working in an after-school program. And then what's very exciting is that I think it was with Central Unified, they just launched a teacher residency model where they are recruiting for the teacher residency from the California Teaching Fellows Foundation workforce. So this is, again, a great example and probably the expanded learning provider that is furthest along in developing these pathways. Next slide. This is just another example of a pathway model. And this is really taking a regional approach. So this is in the Monterey County area where there are multiple opportunities, right, for an expanded learning worker to continue to gain coursework or units through training. And this one in particular is focused on STEAM. So they get units as being a part of that community of practice. Next slide. Talked about a few of these already, just want to highlight some. One of the things we hear from teaching fellows, I learned this from teaching fellows very early on, that gets in the way of partnership is scheduling. And it's as simple and as complex as that, right? For their partnership to work with institutions of higher ed, they need coursework to be scheduled during the first part of the day so that students can go to their job in their expanded learning or after school program after school. And we know that that is not always an easy thing to do, but that is one of the biggest barriers that they run into when working with their institutions of higher ed partners. I mentioned lots of coursework is offered and can be offered, particularly when you know and have a partnership with the expanded learning providers in your region to know what kind of coursework and training they need. We can provide credit for work experience and internships in expanded learning. And then this last piece is really exciting, developing dual enrollment and apprenticeship pathways. With dual enrollment or any kind of high school internship program, we know one of the strategies is that the after school program can be the sort of cohort and community for those high school students. So the after school program can provide some of the pre-employment training, right? Like how to get your resume together, what to expect in terms of kind of professionalism, because they have that strong relationship with those high school students already. They're in a trusting adult to student relationship. They get the internship, right? Or they get the work experience. And then that after school program can continue to be the learning and the reflection for those high school students as they, go through their program. So think about, in terms of the wraparound supports, what we know high school students need, think about how our high school after school programs can play a role in supporting that. Next slide. We are super excited to have worked with the statewide committee to develop expanded learning apprenticeship standards. And we are also very excited to get some support from ECEPs, who many of you probably know about, to launched an apprenticeship program using these standards with an expanded learning provider in the Bay Area. This apprenticeship program is designed for our younger, kind of, no or limited college experience who have a passion for education. So really kind of trying to recruit, that newer, less experienced workforce. And we can't wait to share with you a year from now where we are. The timeline is to actually launch this program in January of next year. And I think there might be one more slide. Additional ways to partner with your expanded learning, partners is to go after some shared funding and grants like the California Apprenticeship Initiative, but there could be others, to invite expanded learning representatives to be on advisory or steering committees. If you're looking at curricula, if you're looking at program design, your expanded learning, provider partners can be really useful there. Again, mentioned data tracking and labor market data. We don't do this very well as a field, as an expanded learning field, but we can certainly utilize and leverage the labor market research that you all do. Obviously, hiring events and job fairs are going to be super important. I think this is an interesting one that Kathleen also does a great job of promoting, is to invite and recruit expanded learning staff to teach at community colleges, or even come in, and be a guest speaker during courses. We have a lot of really great, higher level expanded learning staff. And then, of course, to engage in some shared outreach when it comes to recruitment and even just promoting your program. All right, last slide. I'll wrap up with some key themes. Jeff, feel free to chime in. Partnerships is a win-win, right? It's a win for students. They're getting more seamless kind of programming and experience as they advance in their educational career as well as their professional career. And it's a win-win. It's a win for expanded learning and community college programs, right? Because we are able to work with our workforce. All hands on deck is needed here, right? And I would say probably creative partnership, or being willing to be creative to create something that doesn't exist. We also have infrastructure to build from. There are really core kind of coordination in all regions of the state when it comes to the expanded learning field. And so reach out to Jeff or myself to get connected with those regional kind of leads all across the state. Many opportunities and assets also means that there are many players and bureaucracies, and the expanded learning field is not going to be familiar with the bureaucracies of the community college system. So I think it just really highlights the importance of the role of coordination and centralization. So who can be the lead on some things to help manage and navigate the bureaucracy. And then lastly, we're talking about both the need for near-term and long-term opportunities. We know that there are immediate recruitment needs. Get out, promote, partner on the job fairs, but also building these pipelines is the long game. And so we need to kind of hold the stamina to do both, to address immediate needs, to leverage near-term opportunities, as well as build those long-term pieces. Jeff, anything to add there?
Besides that, I couldn't agree more with everything that you said. I just really do want to emphasize that point of the long game, right? That these were issues before COVID, and they will continue to be issues after COVID, unless folks like all of us take the initiative to play that long game and actually create the systemic solutions to these challenges that have been ongoing. So we're looking forward to working with each and every one of you to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff and Alea. I so appreciate you bringing the extended learning workforce needs to this group. I believe we're probably not taking this gap seriously enough. The students are most certainly in our colleges. They are working in this sector, subsector. And I do have to say, employers are competing for the very same people. Early childhood wants kind, compassionate, loving, educated workers. So does EXL. So does the infant toddler program down the street. So does TK. So does K-12 teaching. We're looking for those same inherent qualities in individuals, and the exploding growth this year is what we're trying to address. As you're entering things in the Jamboard, and again, thank you, Ale and Jeff, for bringing this. Your information is on our PowerPoint. We've listed the link to our PowerPoint. We'll also be posting it. But I do want to give you a hot off the press labor market run that was just done for me. Actually, I just got it today. So I just want to just share this, and I'll put it in the PowerPoint when I when we're done. But we've done with our centers of excellence at the community colleges, we're able to look at labor market needs in 20 key sectors, and career job areas in these subsectors. What Ale and Jeff did refer to, though, are there are data gaps in extended learning. There are also data gaps in exempt care. Nannies, exempt care providers, and even family child care providers don't show up in our numbers because family child care is classified as business owners. Exempt care providers are probably not even there. But we just looked at all the data for the state of California. It looks like 1.2 million people are working in our identifiable sectors, the 20 clustered job categories that we can find. And I just wanted to, this really scared me. Between 2020 and 2025, we're looking at 500,000 replacement jobs open. And that had to do with retirements. It had to do with the COVID pandemic. It had to do with looking at job openings and looking at whether they were replacing existing jobs or new jobs. So 500,000 jobs we're predicting through 2025. 604 openings in our system in this sector. So yes, some are replacing these jobs, the retirements, the people that have left, with some new jobs, but these are huge numbers, 604,000. I do want to say, though, the Centers for Excellence data is not able to call the numbers for this new money. So new money, all the expansion in the governor's budget this year, next year, expanded learning, TK, all of those numbers are not here yet. So this is just looking at replacement jobs and openings for 2020 to 2025, not including new money. So I'll add it in the PowerPoint. I thought it was, it scares me that we lost 500,000 people replacing jobs, retirement, step away. I don't know what the COVID pandemic's going to shake this all out. I think we'll see the true numbers in about 2 years, but we have a lot of needs. So thank you. Please enter your data in here, and I will be ramping up for our next panel. And Jeff and Alea, any final comments, any thoughts? I know you're predicting 200,000 members of the workforce in Excel. I know we've had in the chat lots of comments around TK, and they're going to need Excel too. Any final comments?
I mean, just to reiterate, I think Jeff and myself are more than happy to connect you with your regional and local expanded learning ecosystem. Like I said, there is a strong infrastructure that we can build from. And I think more and more the expanded learning system is recognizing the need for partnership and kind of creative solutions for to address these workforce challenges. And so it's an exciting kind of wave of momentum that I think we have. A lot of urgency, certainly, like propelling that forward. But yeah, again, just we are more than happy to connect you, to our work, and then and because Jeff and Can does really great convening of sort of statewide systems, and we know that regional and sort of local partnerships are needed, and so we're more than happy to make those connections also.
Thank you, Leah.
Yeah.
I'll just share in closing that an opportunity is a set of circumstances that make it possible to do something. And as challenging and as daunting as all of the sets of circumstances are around us, we've never had a better opportunity for this level of partnership to create these types of pipelines. And so I hope that we use this set of circumstances to seize this opportunity.
Thank you, Jeff. Great closing comment. I did notice in the chat a number of comments around, needing to work with employers and making sure that employers understand the value of coursework and coming in with, key levels of competencies, and to kind of prevent what we're doing right now, which is pretty much many of our subsectors and many of our employers are just hiring whoever they can find in not only Excel, but in all subsectors of early childhood and education. So we need to, ramp this up and look at what our children need. And they need passionate, educated, kind, wonderful employees, and they deserve that. So thank you so much for being here. Much appreciated. Again, oh yeah, we have a 2-minute break. So quick 2 minutes and we'll be looking at workforce pipelines. And we've got a great panel coming up in less than 2 minutes. I think there's only a few of us that are actually suffering from this lack of break here. And I know I'm one of them, but it's okay. I can look at my Zen rocks. So we have about 2 minutes, take a quick break, and we'll be welcoming our workforce pipeline panel shortly. Please add to the Jamboard. If these numbers haven't scared you yet, just think of all the people that we need to serve in California based on what you're hearing today and what you need to do that. So enter away.
Kathleen, I would like to give a plug too. Please start entering on the second slide at this point. I don't quite know how to move them. I can move them within one slide, but if people could start making comments on the second or third slide of the Jamboard, that'd be great. It's a good problem to have. Slide 1 is almost full. So they continue the conversation, please, everybody.
That's a great problem to have. You can also enter stuff in the chat, but great problem to have. We want to hear from you. So excited to look at your comments, and we'll be clustering this into categories. So I'm sure we have some common themes. Oh, and the Jamboard, the link, Renee, would you mind popping it in the
Absolutely. Just give me a
chat again? Thank you.
Put it in.
Yeah, thank you. So I think my 2 minutes are up. Just about. And I do see my panelists. Let me set the stage while the rest of you are Jamboarding. And I'm so happy to have this group of people talking about workforce investments. We will be discussing apprenticeship, funding, working in the workforce investment world, and what kinds of partnerships we may need to cultivate in our local communities and in California to really address this compelling need. So panelists, I see Adele here, and I know Charles and John are hopped on. So are we all ready?
Yep, you bet.
Okay,
Set.
Great. Thank you. So I'd like to, first I'll just briefly introduce our panelists. Again, workforce investment. We will have a bit of time for questions at the end, and you most certainly can enter things in the chat and I can elevate them, hopefully. I'll notice them. So I'd like to introduce, first we have John Dunn, who's our apprenticeship director in the San Francisco Bay region, funded from a regional joint venture under Strong Workforce Programming. We have Charles Henkels, who's the director of regional apprenticeships and workforce learning from the Riverside Community College, IDERC region, and that covers a huge swath of land east of Los Angeles. I looked at the map and I just couldn't believe how large that area was. And we have Adele Burns, who's the deputy director, and I spelled director wrong, and that's why I'm saying this, deputy director in the Department of Industrial Standards. It's a new job for her, fairly new. We had her in the Bay region and lost her to the state. So congratulations on your work, Adele. And I'm going to start right here. And I believe, John, you're kicking this off.
Yeah, thanks everybody. And Kathleen, this has been fantastic. I've actually been listening as much as possible for the last 2.5 hours or so. And I wanted to listen in and hear what other folks are saying to make sure that I didn't repeat anything. And I think I am gonna take the time to look at apprenticeships, but I want everybody to understand, you'll hear me talk about apprenticeships and be a loudmouth advocate for it in general, but this particular slice of apprenticeship, and Jeff's heard this before, and a lot of people here have heard this from me before, this is really my favorite one, early childhood ed and education, because I was a high school teacher for 10 years, and I was a high school teacher because my parents were both teachers, and my mom was a kindergarten teacher for most of her career. So this idea of finding caring, compassionate people from the neighborhood actually is compelling to me personally. So I really appreciate you putting this together, and this has been even better than I expected. This has been fantastic. But what you're going to learn listening to myself and Charles and Adele is all the things you've heard up to this point can be packaged together into apprenticeship. And I think personally, it's the best way to do it. I know there are other ways to do it, but if any of you, a lot of you had to work for free to get your teaching credential, that's not fun. It's still painful 25 years later. So this is what I want to talk about today. So apprenticeships it's a teaching and learning method. It's a way to learn. I think it's great. My grandfather did it. I've got something on the wall back here I'm not going to bring down that'll show you that he got an apprenticeship in 1927 in Richmond, California. It is a workforce development tool, and I've been lucky enough to work kind of both on the education side and the workforce development side. And we need to understand that we're in both worlds in a lot of ways. And I like the fact that apprenticeship is being promoted on the workforce development side as much as it is, as well as the education side, because it's extremely important that we all work together. And a little bit of the turf conversation was up earlier, that needs to go away. This is way too important to worry about that stuff. And I think we're very much in that collaborative conversation. I like it a lot because it is contextualized learning. When I work with the building trades, and when I first got involved in apprenticeship, and I saw how many of the building trades were teaching algebra and geometry and advanced algebra, and you barely knew what it was because they didn't call it by that. They just taught it, and they did it in a contextualized way. And I really began to appreciate how I might have actually learned Algebra 2 a little bit better than I did if it would have been taught in a more contextualized way. So I think it takes some of our learners that maybe haven't had a great time in high school and shows them why this is a great way to learn. It connects the reality to the classroom, and I just love it. So anyway. It's not new, and I almost said it's easy to start, but I took something I think from what Charles told me recently and some other folks. You know what? It's not that easy. It is difficult, but that's what I'm here for. That's what Charles is here for. That's what Adele and the Division of Apprenticeship Standards are here for. And we've already laid the groundwork for so much of it. We just need to put the parts together. And it is very much a student-centered kind of concept of learning, but it's worth it for everybody involved, the student, the college, the employer. So next slide. I'm going to go a little bit quick. There it is. What's a registered apprenticeship? And I want to ensure that everybody understands when we talk about apprenticeship, we talk about registered apprenticeship that's recognized by either the state of California or the federal Department of Labor or both. In California, we want you to be recognized by California for sure, and we'd love to have it be recognized by the federal Department of Labor also. But it is, and this is a rough structure. There is some flexibility in here. Essentially, it's 1 year of on-the-job training that can be shortened by giving credit for prior learning. So that work that maybe somebody does in an extended learning job might give credit towards an apprenticeship. That work that they did as a classroom aide, that might, that's up to the committee and the folks that run the apprenticeship, but generally it's 1 year, and then roughly 144 hours a year of classroom instruction. We don't have a problem with that in this industry sector at all, that we're going to hit those numbers very easily. And in the end, it's a paid job while you go to school. That's the whole point. You'll hear earn and learn. You'll hear you have to get paid. It doesn't work unless you're working and going to school at the same time, because that's what eliminates some of those barriers that have been discussed today. So next slide. There we go. So just so everybody understands what this RSI is, it's the curriculum in the classroom. So it's essentially the classroom seat time work. And obviously you don't have to be in the classroom to do that. You can be at home, you can be on your phone, you can do it any number of ways. There's great different ways to deliver that classroom instruction. But that's that 4-credit learning at a community college or a CSU, or even in a high school in a dual enrollment situation. That's the classroom instruction, where you get it deep into the occupation, so folks learn what this is all about. You learn about pedagogy. You learn about the things you need to do to become a successful teacher. Those classes may count towards a college degree. In this world, they should, absolutely, because in this world, the pathway to a better, higher paying job and an extended career is through a college degree program in some way or another. So I encourage everybody in this particular industry sector to make sure that there is college credit attached to everything, if not maybe a little bit, but everything you do. And then again, you learn with lectures, hands-on demonstrations, presentations in a lab environment that's safe and collaborative and a place for you to practice. And then you go out on the job. So next slide, we'll talk about that. And this is the important collaborative piece. I was thinking about this when I was getting ready to present today, and I learned more a couple, 3, 4, 5 years after I got out of the classroom about curriculum development than I did in my credential program, honestly, because I had already gone out and done it. And I learned what worked and what doesn't in a classroom. And so the on-the-job training is tightly connected to that classroom instruction, where you get to practice and reflect and come back and practice again and learn by doing. We're talking about it here. More importantly, perhaps, in the world that we're thinking about in terms of getting a much more diverse group of educators involved, is there's a mentor attached to this, a real mentor that is working with you daily on your schoolwork, on your classroom instruction, on the job training. And it's somebody that when you're setting up apprenticeship programs, we think a lot about mentorships and teaching the mentors how to be a good mentor also. That's extremely important. But that mentor is there to help you and guide you as an apprentice. You've got an articulated skills progression with at least one wage increase. From everything I've seen so far, looking at the different potential apprenticeship programs we're talking about today, that's not a problem either. You're going to get a raise somewhere along the line, and you're going to track your skills progression along the way. So we're looking at some of the wage progression. Once in the building trades generally starts around 50%. I think in our world with education, ECE, who knows what that's going to look like, but there will be a wage progression involved because that helps to incentivize the apprentice to continue working and improving. I do want to emphasize in the on-the-job training component how important it is to get that practice and to have a long list of skills that you're learning in the classroom or on the job that are checked off by your mentor. And it's a pretty granular set of skills and skill development, and we call them work processes, but it's a great list, and we already have them in education, but it's more formal, and it's up to the apprentice and the mentor to work together to check those boxes and make sure that that skill development is occurring in an orderly manner and on time. And if somebody needs to come back and practice again, they come back and practice again. But guess what? They're getting paid for it. So great. Next slide. I keep wanting to click the slide, Kathleen, but I'm going to put my mouse away and stop touching it.
Yeah, I'll do it for you. Can I just add, because I want to pause on the mentor comment. In our field in early childhood, we have our California Early Childhood Mentor Program. So we've got a system in kind of our subsector of our ECE, EDU sector around mentoring. And also in the K-12 world, there are classroom mentors for new teachers. So some of this is kind of in place. All this language makes sense.
I'm so happy to hear that. And I do want to drop this in because it's not in my presentation. Well, I'm going to wait till the funding slide. How about that? I'll remember it then. I do want to address this thing right here because a lot of folks misidentify an apprenticeship when it's really an internship. Okay. And I won't go through the whole thing, but essentially an internship is shorter term, not as formalized. The Division of Apprenticeship Standards several years ago created a registered pre-apprenticeship status, which I think all of us should use in as we develop these apprenticeship programs. That looks more like an internship. It may not even be on the job. It might just be a classroom component, especially in the K-12 world. If you're in an education pathway in the K-12 world, you could be considered a pre-apprentice pretty easily, as long as there's an apprenticeship to go to. So I'll take, you can see this, but a registered apprenticeship is much more formal and it's nationally recognized. It's a portable certificate. And in terms of student centeredness, I think that national certificate and state certificate, along with your credential that you may get, is a big deal. And that's something you can take with you wherever you may have to relocate, if you have to relocate. So, all right, next page. All right, here's some benefits to everybody. I'm sure you can already understand what the benefits might be, but for that apprentice, it's hands-on training. It's practicing and learning and going back and practicing again and contextualized. And again, you get that industry certification, you get your academic credits towards college degrees and your credential. Again, you're going to hear it from me. I love it. It's the best way to learn, I think. And I wish I would have had an apprenticeship program as a student teacher. So the employer, from their perspective, you get someone who, while they may be learning on the job, they are supported in several different ways with their mentor, with their classroom instruction. They become more efficient and a more productive worker. And I'm using those terms. It's strange to say that in an educational environment, but in some ways it is. If you have a certain amount of curriculum to get through, depending on what you're teaching, you learn how to better manage your time and better manage the classroom. And we have data from other industry sectors that show that an apprentice that works in this kind of registered environment becomes more productive, more efficient, more quickly than someone who is not supported in an apprenticeship type of learning model. And I think that can be applied to education also quite easily. So I'd love to get some data on that. The researchers, you can reach out to Charles and Adele to work on that today. So, and also increased retention. If any of you have ever worked in a job where you really appreciated the leadership and the training you got and the professional development, you understand why that might want to help you stay someplace that otherwise maybe you might think about taking off. And we've all probably worked in that place too, but you get much more increased retention, and we really, really, really need that. The fact that people bail out so much in the first 5 years, I think that goes to that dropping a new teacher in a classroom, whatever the classroom may be, and walking away. And I understand administrators have a tough job too, we all do. But this provides a much more collegial, collaborative, supportive environment that I think I remember from when my parents were teachers, and I knew how they all hung out together at the end of the day or in the staff lounge. I can remember actually walking into my middle school staff lounge with my dad in there, and they actually smoked back then in the staff lounge. So that's how long it's been. But that was a collegial environment. Same when I got my teaching credential. And I don't know if we have that as much as we used to. And that's a big deal in retention. And then the community college perspective, again, we increased enrollment from apprenticeship. You're going to pick up apportionment for your apprenticeship classes, and you're going to pick up work experience, FTESs. So thinking, in terms of the revenue and enrollment decline, that work experience slice is 16 more units of FTESs, unless we can convince the legislature to change it to more than 16 units. That'd be great, but we'll see. You can max out at 16 units of work experience, and that also helps you just gather up those units needed to get a certificate or a degree. So and again, you're going to meet employment outcomes. You're going to check some boxes in terms of connecting with employers. You're going to hit the benchmark and wage increases over time. And at the end of the day, we're here to help the student, and this helps the student, and it provides a pathway to them for them to stay in college, to stay with the program and get a good paying job. And then a big deal, it is a mandate from the governor and a priority for the chancellor's office. The governor would like to see 500,000 apprenticeships by the end of 2028. COVID might have stuck a pin in that for a bit, but that's one of the goals. And I'm looking over here at the, and I'm going to add this in here. One of the benefits for the student, if you're an apprentice in a registered apprenticeship program, your fees are waived. Gone, just simple, easy, waived, no big deal. They're gone. And the chancellor's office reimburses the college for that. It's not out of their pocket. That comes back later on. Somebody else can explain the 320 system and some other time. So
if we can.
Yeah, Donna, you mentioned books. That's what some of the grant funding could pay for. So next slide. And I'm going to shut up really quick. Charles has got a lot of stuff. Here's some funding. I wrote in there in red. I want you to think about what other sources of funding. I think we've heard them today. Extended learning has some funding. We have apportionment. We have RSI funding is a long story. I'll tell you some other time. Employment Training Panel might have some slice of money. And then the California Apprenticeship Initiative, it's called the CAI grants, and the Federal Department of Labor have grants coming out. So if you're interested in those particular grants, if you haven't been involved in those before, the Foundation for California Community Colleges is the technical assistance provider for those CAI grants. I helped write the first RFA 7 years back. They have $20+ million right now that they're hoping to get out that's in the current fiscal cycle, and another $30 million in the May revise. So there's a bunch of money in there. And I want to add in this particular one, the California Commission on Teacher, or California Student Aid Commission has what they call the LEAP fund. And while Charles is talking, I'll put the link in here to a webpage for that. They receive $500 million and another $500 million, so a $1 billion to help offset wages for employers in a work-based learning situation for a student. And the general guidelines around that are if they're working for the school that they go to or a school or government, I believe it's 100% reimbursement. If it's a nonprofit, it's 75%. And if it's private sector, 50%. And Jeff is smiling, but maybe he has more information, but I don't know. We'll worry about, but think the Student Aid Commission can actually maybe help offset some of these wages for this work-based learning and apprenticeship. So we're talking to them. Next page.
Also, can I add to students, even though they're not paying tuition, are still eligible for financial aid. So in our sector, most of our students are financial aid eligible. So we do have additional options, even though they're not paying tuition, for books and some other expenses.
There you go. Here's some of the, this is yours.
Yeah.
All right. I'm done. Thanks, everybody.
I slipped this in between John and I just want to share locally in the SF Bay region our contact information and some of our community colleges that are engaged in apprenticeship work. So Berkeley City College, Skyline and the San Mateo Community College District, City College of San Francisco, Hartnell College. We're in different stages of development. Berkeley's probably the most further along, but we're learning as we're going and are always happy to share. So just want to give you this information. Thank you, John. And when we have questions, we'll hop back to you. I'm sure you'll have some questions.
I'll stick around.
Great. Thank you. And I'd like to introduce Charles Henkels from our Riverside Community College District. There's the map I was looking at. Huge east of Los Angeles region. And Charles, do you want to take it away?
Great, thanks so much. Well, it's really good to be here, and I'm just going to echo John's sentiments earlier. I won't spend a lot of time saying the exact same things, but yeah, this is a terrific symposium. Really honored to be a part of it. So, Charles Henkels, I'm the director for Regional Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning. I'm hosted at Riverside Community College District, and but if you notice, I put this logo, the Inland Empire Desert Regional Consortium. So back in 2018, what happened was we had all these, you see all these community college logos on here. All these community colleges kind of recognized that there was this issue. They wanted to create apprenticeship programs, but the process for creating new programs, bringing them online, there was a really steep learning curve. And so what the Inland Empire colleges decided to do was to use some of their regional strong workforce funds, and they funded a project called the Launch Apprenticeship Network. And you can go to the next slide. But basically what it was, the intent was to kind of develop some regional infrastructure for new programs. And so unfortunately, we're not all in person, but some of you may have heard of this thing called the 500,000 apprentices goal that Governor Newsom had kind of implanted into his campaign to be elected as governor. Like I said, I wish we could like show hands or something like that, but if you're around the community colleges, if you're around the apprenticeship community, you've probably heard this term. We're going to build our apprenticeship system to 500,000 people by 2029. What a lot of people don't know is that was actually kind of a second part of an economic plan. And the first part was actually to build these kind of regionally focused cluster groups where education, organizations, businesses, workforce stakeholders, universities, K through 12s, essentially kind of built collaboratives with sort of a regional focus. And so that's really where, Launch came around. Was we sort of took this approach that we were going to be a regionally focused apprenticeship consortium. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. And so a couple of things that maybe we should talk about real quick if you're brand new to apprenticeship. So I just said that word 500,000, right? Or I said that number 500,000. So to give you an idea of what that means is right now our apprenticeship system usually hovers between about 85 to 95,000 apprentices. So this is just like a snapshot of our state apprenticeship system. In late 2020, this was kind of when it was actually, believe it or not, this is actually when it was about at its largest. And I'm not going to have enough time to go through some of these numbers, but I want to highlight a couple of things that are really important. the vast majority of our apprentices in our state are in what we'd refer to as traditional apprenticeship programs. Those are like building trades programs. Also, the vast majority of apprentices in our state's programs are also mostly men. And that has a lot to do with the with the trades that we're talking about and the kind of work that typically has been traditionally apprenticeship. But if you look down at that lower half side, you'll see this kind of growing initiative, right? And that's this growing initiative around non-traditional apprenticeships. And while it's not as big, there's some really cool and really encouraging things that we're starting to see. So we're actually seeing in non-traditional apprenticeships, we actually already have more non-traditional women apprentices in programs than we have in the entire traditional program put together. And so it's almost twice as many women in these non-traditional programs. And so we're really encouraged to see that as we're kind of growing apprenticeship, we're also starting to grow who is available, who is served by our registered apprenticeship system. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. And so what we, like I said, we kind of knew this idea of, okay, what does it take to grow apprenticeship? So if we're talking about taking our existing apprenticeship system and essentially making it about 5 to 6 times bigger than it is, how do we look at this as a region? And I think the first thing that we looked at as a region was we wanted to identify our reason why to do it, right? So just having a number, just having a goal is good, but it doesn't necessarily, set up your North Star. It doesn't necessarily, set up your principles. And so what we did was we kind of took a survey of our region and figured out, okay, how well, if we did nothing, how well is the system working? And here's a couple of things that we discovered. So first of all, we discovered we had 83,000 disconnected youth. That's like ages 16 to 24, people that were either not in school or not in a job. In our region, 77% of residents over 25 don't have a 4-year degree. And we kind of follow similar to the national average of about $36,000, $40,000 in debt for people that do go to, to universities. And of that, there's a lot of borrowers, about 40% of borrowers were leaving college, leaving universities before obtaining a degree. So essentially they were keeping the debt, not getting the degree, right? You can go ahead and go to the next slide. And so we kind of said, hey, this is the issue. This is what we're trying to fix. And I would say, so this is kind of our big model, our big concept, or our big approach. And that's this idea of really integrating the apprenticeship model, the earn and learn model into our institutions. So instead of thinking of apprenticeship as this kind of alternative or this separate thing, what we've been working on the Inland Empire is a way to actually kind of bring earn and learn apprenticeship into our institutions. And you'll see just kind of from the slide, what it really requires us to do is to really partner a lot of different groups. And so when we're approaching apprenticeship, John had mentioned, I sometimes I'll talk about it's not easy. Essentially what I want to say, it's not easy, but it's good. And what I mean by that is when you really start involving these different partners, one of the cool things that happens is you actually start to see these programs come alive. You start to see like opportunities come about that your school couldn't provide on its own, or your employee, as an employer, you couldn't provide your employees the same opportunity on its own. But this is kind of giving you a big picture. I know I'm moving pretty fast. You can go to the next slide. But what I want to do real quick is talk to the educators why those partnerships are so important. So that might have scared you a little bit, seeing all those different, types of roles and things that would plug into creating the apprenticeship integrating it in your system. But what I want to highlight is if you're taking on apprenticeship programs as an institution, what you're really doing is you're kind of asking your institution to do a couple things that it hasn't historically done before, most likely. So if you look at this thing, here's like the basic highlights. If you were asking me what is an apprenticeship, John just did a really good summary. And so I'm not going to go super deep into it. Basically, think about it like a job. Think about it like a paycheck. It's an opportunity to learn while you're being paid, right? It's also, can't underemphasize the learning portion of that. It's not just a job, it's actually a job where you're actively engaged in growing, right? The intent of that job is to grow you. And then of course, with apprenticeship, as John had just mentioned, there's also an education component. Now, why do I bring up these three things? As schools, we're really used to the education component. We're super comfortable, having classes, delivering instruction, evaluating learning, right? Student learning objectives, that is our wheelhouse. We're excellent at it. Placing students in work, that's kind of on our fringe, right? Those are things that we're doing and we're getting better at, but it's not something that historically colleges have really, pressured themselves to do. And in an apprenticeship program, the intent is to get these students working in that capacity. And so that's why those partnerships are such a big deal. It's also not just getting them placed in any job, but getting them placed with employers that are champions of that same thing, that hands-on learning, employers that kind of have that same vision. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. And so we've always kind of emphasized the idea of an apprenticeship program, as colleges are taking on, you have to think of it like it's a work-based learning program. And so the components of that apprenticeship program can't be limited to the classroom. You have to kind of think of it, comprehensively. And so what we aim at with all our programs, and they all start, I'll be honest with you, all programs, they start with different components in place. I've never had a program just arrive that is completely done. Nothing, nothing needs to happen. Everything takes some work, but these are some of the core things that we look for in an apprenticeship program that's going to succeed. So directed education, what that means is there's the school, not only do they offer the courses, they also know how to steer someone through that, right? And that's what apprentices are going to go into. That instead of looking at the whole college catalog, typically apprentices are just looking at a short sequence of courses that they're going to work through. On the job learning, we just talked about that a moment ago. Work-based learning faculty. This is one we always throw in as, hey, this is something you should be thinking about long-term. Do you have faculty that are focused on work-based learning curriculum and competency-based learning curriculum? If you do, I will almost guarantee you in the long run, that program will succeed. If you don't, I will almost guarantee you in the long run, you will have serious issues sustaining that program, right? And so be thinking about it early on. How do you implement that work-based learning focus at a faculty, at a catalog, at a college program level? And then of course, also be thinking about mentors. These are people that are on the job, that are in the profession, that kind of self-identify as people that apprentices can go to. If you have these components, your programs, I promise you, will succeed. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So couple principles that, like I said, sort of same idea, but basically we're in the Inland Empire. How we look at this is we look at apprenticeship. It's a student-centered and industry-led design. And what that means is our programs are built around the people they're serving, but we look for industry to kind of lead us, right? So we're asking industry questions about, okay, how do we help people grow and succeed in this industry? How do we move them? How do we set up career pathways where people have legitimate progressions towards living wages? Principle 2 is that industry invests in the program and the individual apprentices by providing meaningful paid work-based learning. That's our main ask of employers in our region, is that they're providing meaningful paid work-based learning. We don't do a lot of like fees or collections or anything like that. We want them, everything they're doing, we want them to put it back into their people. Principle 3, apprenticeship is not an alternative to higher education, but it leverages and integrates higher education for the greatest impact. Apprenticeship really needs to be an options multiplier, especially in a field like ECE, where people are going to want to go, they may want to go into a baccalaureate degree. They may want to move into administrative, right? And so there's things like that you need to build in from the very beginning. Principle 4, apprenticeships multiply options for those seeking access to higher paying careers. Let's keep rolling because I want to make sure I give Adele enough time here. Let's keep rolling again. I definitely want to give Adele enough time here. So, John kind of put up a really similar list. What I think that the summary is, there's a lot of different kinds of funding for apprenticeship. In our mentality is, assert the program model that's going to work and then find funding for that. This is like a list of funding that we've used just over the past year, right? To provide funding or build capacity around programs. You can write apprenticeship into a lot of different workforce and a lot of different education grants. And like I said, long-term, I think you also need to be talking with your institutions about sustaining that through their own, FTES funding or RSI funding, if that's a big enough pot there. Next slide. So a couple of the ECE programs that we're working on. I heard earlier the calling out of ECEPs. They've been doing great work. We also partner with them on a couple of programs here. One in San Bernardino with San Bernardino Valley College for Spanish-speaking family childcare. Another registered apprenticeship that just launched this past year at College of the Desert. We also used our regional program sponsorship launch to pilot a teacher and a master teacher and a site supervisor pathway for registered apprentices to an ECE. So these are a couple of things that are going on. All right, next slide, hand it over to Adele. Adele, take it off. Yeah.
So welcome, Adele. That was great. Thank you, Charles. And people are asking in the chat for examples of community colleges. So I'll plop some in, and if you can give some, direct email information or your email, that'd be great. So welcome, Adele.
Hello, folks. It is a pleasure to be here and to see many friendly faces. So yes, I am Adele Burns. I'm the Deputy Chief of the Division of Apprenticeship Standards, which is part of the Department of Industrial Relations. And we are the oversight entity for apprenticeship in California. So Kathleen, if you go to the next slide. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of who we are, the Division of Apprenticeship Standards, we work with employers, we work with educators, we work with organizations essentially that are interested in developing a skilled workforce through registered apprenticeship. And Charles already mentioned this, but we have this big goal of serving 500,000 apprentices by 2029. And this is a goal that Governor Newsom has had since he took office. And there have been various strategic investments to date. And actually today is the announcement of the May revise. And I will share with you some apprenticeship related announcements related to that. But the state of California invests in a lot of ways in apprenticeship that we've I love, Charles, your slide of like all those different funding sources. There's a lot of funding for apprenticeship in California. And I just want to, if you go to the next slide. So my role at DAS is that I am focused on the strategy and policy around expanding apprenticeship in California. And there's a lot of things that I do, but one of the big things that I've been working on is thinking about like an overall strategy to how are we going to accelerate apprenticeship expansion in California. And so we've developed this 5-point action plan. Some of you may have seen this if you attend IACA meetings in the past, but this is a little bit of our strategy around how we're thinking about expanding apprenticeships. And the first point in here is to support regional and sectoral apprenticeship intermediaries. And what we mean when we say intermediaries is, as Charles showed in his slides, like there's a lot of stakeholders that go into creating an apprenticeship program. Educators are certainly an important stakeholder. Employers are an equally important stakeholder. Sometimes community-based organizations can get involved. Unions are sometimes an important stakeholder in the equation, not always, but essentially there needs to be an entity that brings together all of these stakeholders and serves those stakeholders either across a geographic region or across a sector maybe in a larger geographic area. So Launch is a great example of a regional apprenticeship intermediary. So they're aggregating the needs of multiple employers in their region as like, what kind of talent do you need? And let's partner to make it happen. And we'll bring the educators to the table, we'll bring the employers to the table. Another example of an intermediary in this sector is ECEPs, which I know has been mentioned. So that's an example of a sectoral apprenticeship intermediary where they're functioning across the whole state, but serving a particular sector. And so we really want to be investing in and cultivating a whole ecosystem of these kind of organizations to really help you all, right? Because you have talent needs. You're thinking about how can you develop the workforce. And you as educators, I mean, this is sort of an interesting context where as educators, you're both potentially the client, like the employer, and also you're interested in how you can be like educating your students. So anyways, those intermediaries make it easier for all partners to work together. Of course, we're also really focused on expanding non-traditional apprenticeships, which has been nicely defined already, but this is essentially all sectors that are not the building and fire trades. So we're doing a lot to try to think about how we organize ourselves to expand non-traditional apprenticeships. And part of that is how DAS shows up to be supportive in capacity building and stakeholder educating and sort of communicating in forums like this and many others about apprenticeship. And it's fun to have the broader squad. You really have an all-star team here with Charles and John and I here today. This is definitely an amazing group to be speaking to this. And Kathleen, yes, you've also been an incredible champion of this in the Bay Area. So we also do want to be growing and expanding access to traditional construction apprenticeships, which really is speaking to the gender, lack of gender diversity in trades apprenticeships, but that's less relevant to this conversation. We are looking to support youth apprenticeships for both in-school and out-of-school youth. And I would highlight this because there's actually some really interesting examples of early care and education youth apprenticeships. So the Berkeley City College pilot tapped into really young, like the 16 to 24. When we say youth apprenticeships, we're talking about age 16 to 24-year-olds. That was working with YMCA of East Bay. And that was a really cool program that tapped into youth apprentices. There's also a really interesting program in the Central Valley Arch, which is with the San Joaquin County Office of Education, where they're having their IT help desk folks sourcing from high school apprenticeships, which is really cool. So I would encourage you to think about yourselves as the employer in addition to the educator, right? Because you're filling your own workforce needs. And I think youth apprenticeship is a really interesting way that you can be developing that. And then last but definitely not least is expanding state and local public sector apprenticeships. And actually I would call education apprenticeships certainly, but I think also given a lot of the recent policy change, early care also, we consider under the banner of public sector apprenticeships. And I think there's just a huge opportunity for us to be expanding public sector apprenticeships from everything from employment at the state level to like all the different kinds of public sector employment. So if you go to the next slide, this has been somewhat touched on, but I just want to point out in terms of how we structure our work. There are two apprenticeship committees in California. One is the CAC, which is over traditional apprenticeships, and the other is IACA, which is the Interagency Advisory Committee on Apprenticeships. And these folks meet quarterly. There is a subcommittee on public sector apprenticeships. And I think like this is a forum, it's an advisory entity to DAS as to how we shape policy and strategy. So I welcome you to join this conversation. And certainly education is under the banner of IACA apprenticeships. If you go to the next slide. And how we are organizing ourselves at DAS. I did some last minute updates. So when Kathleen shares these slides, you'll have the email addresses for these folks, but how we're organizing ourselves at DAS is to have really a sector strategy around apprenticeship expansion. So DAS has historically been really organized geographically, and we're now organizing around sector focus areas. And so these are the different sectors. And like I mentioned, early care and education definitely falls under the public sector umbrella. And Kelly Mackey and Fred De Leon are the partnerships team. So if you're interested in starting a new program, they are folks that you can follow up with. Of course, you can follow up with me and I'll connect you with them. And then we also have our program management team. So if you're already running a program, you may already know Laura Thompson or Kalina Olson. And if you don't already, you may be hearing from one of them. But this is, we're creating these sector focused teams because we recognize that there are important like particularities to different sectors, and education is certainly one of them. And so we want to be supporting the ecosystem from that sort of sector focus. And if you go to the next slide, and I know I'm at time here. So what I am very, very excited to share with you all today, and this is hot off the press, is that in the most recent May revise, which was released today, included in that is the creation of what's called the Apprenticeship Innovation Funding. And this is going to be really focused on creating a source of sustainable funding for those apprenticeship intermediaries. And it's really investing in these industry-led sector and regionally based multi-employer IACA apprenticeship programs. So this is really focused on what I was talking about with the supporting the intermediaries, developing non-traditional apprenticeships, And we recognize that there's a body of work to organizing all of those multiple stakeholders and aggregating those demands. So it's going to be an investment of $230 million over 3 years, which works out to be about $70 million and then $80 million a year. And this is going to be used to support the ongoing cost of these programs and somewhat also to support some of the classroom training where it makes sense. So there will be an information session that dives into a lot more details about this on Monday at 11:30 a.m. So if you're intrigued, come and learn more. And Kathleen, I'll be sure to send you that invite, which I believe is going out to the public right now. And so that anybody here who's interested can join.
Thank you, Adele. 2 quick questions before we conclude for our next panel. One is, will community colleges and higher ed be eligible for these funds? And can you briefly just talk about federal funding? I know Build Back Better and childcare and American Jobs, we're still in discussion. We don't know what we'll get, but can you just briefly talk about apprenticeship in the federal area, and will higher ed be eligible for this funding pot?
Yes, higher ed is absolutely eligible for this funding pot because who plays that role of apprenticeship intermediary looks different in different contexts, right? Okay. And sometimes it's the community college that steps up and plays that convening role. So whoever is the registered program sponsor for an apprenticeship program will be eligible for the funding. So yes, great. Absolutely. And to speak a little bit to the federal funding, there was just a grant through ETA that I know just closed recently. A lot of people put in a proposal for that. So I didn't touch on that because that ship has sailed, but trust me, there is a lot more coming behind it. In the budget that was passed in, I think it was February, there was a 27% increase in apprenticeship funding. Mm-hmm. So that's like the pot of money that DOL has available to do grants like that ETA grant that was out, has just been increased by a big chunk in the coming years. So we 100% expect there to be more grant opportunities coming out. I will just share my 2 cents. I observed there's so many grant opportunities, and I'm really interested in not having you all having to chase grants all the time. And this apprenticeship innovation funding is trying to get at a slightly different approach to funding that's more formula funding and less grant-based funding. Now, grants, I think, are going to continue to play a really important role, especially in the startup phase. So CAI grants and DOL grants and HRTP grants, all of these are really valuable and important funding to help get you going. But I'm hopeful that we're starting to address some of the ongoing funding challenges of how do you create that sustainable funding model over time. And I think really key components of that are getting your education part paid for, which if it's at a community college, it's free. I just want to say that like 100 times over again. It was earlier in the chat. I know John spoke to it. If you have students who are apprentices registered in 4-credit classes, do not, for the love of God, pay for that out of any of your grant funding. It is free. The state of California pays for it. You just have to set up the right billing internal processes. Yes. So FTES, the fees are waived and it's covered by the state of California for all apprentices. So the education gets completely free for all apprentices. There's also what's called RSI funding, which is when it's sort of in a more third-party capacity of training, but associated with an educational institution, which is how a lot of the trades have their apprenticeship programs set up. And that's actually another way in which the state of California right now is investing in apprenticeships, is that that's actually being brought up to be on par with FTES reimbursement rates. So that's another big announcement in today's budget. But it's just like so you need to figure out the education component, but that's figured out for you. If you're a community college, it's done. You're good. You don't need to worry about how you pay for the courses. but there is an overhead to running the program in general. And that's what this apprenticeship innovation funding is looking to touch on. The other thing I would recommend, and this speaks a little bit to the federal funding, is work with your workforce development board when you're putting together a program, because you can tap into WIOA funding to help with some of those support services for your apprentices, whether it be books or translation or language support, or there's like lots of services that the workforce board are well positioned to support with. So I feel like that is the winning ongoing funding equation, is to have, so anyways, I'll stop. I know I'm going over, but hopefully that speaks to some of the funding stuff. I could geek out for a long time on this funding stuff.
Thank you, Adele. That's why we invited you. We do have to go to our next panel. So I just want to give a warm thank you to John, Charles, and Adele. All the resources, I will plop them in the PowerPoint as soon as I get them, as soon as they're available. We will be posting it on Teach for LA's website, as well as Teach for the Bay and the BACCC web pages. You can also email me directly and I can just send you the PowerPoint. And we also have shared the link to the PowerPoint, and I will be updating it as I get information. So it should update when you have that link. Thank you so much. And I think this whole workforce development world is critical for our sector to get involved in, to be right in line for. And this is a way that we can address some of these labor shortages. So thank you so much for your time. Okay, our last panel. And oh, here's, if you want to just grab Adele's email very quickly, I'll leave this up. And Adele, there's no link yet for the May 16 meeting, correct? Because it was just announced.
I think so. I'll look at my email. If I have it before this concludes, I'll drop it in. But I'll
she'll drop it in the chat if you have it. I know it was kind of hot off the press. So if you do have it, drop it in the chat. There's your email. I don't want to send everyone to you though. I'll post it on the BACC website, and you can email me if I get it before Monday. So we're talking in 3 days, right? This Monday. Okay. Okay, no problem. Okay, so grab Adele's email, and then please enter into the Jamboard as we transition to our final panel, which will help us to consolidate what we need to do, what our next steps are, advocating for our needs, advocating for our future needs. Here's our Jamboard questions again. And I didn't even put the break slide in here because I knew we wouldn't have time for a break. So we're going to be transitioning into the final session around advocacy. We're welcoming our Peach partners, and Peach can describe what Peach partners mean. And we have some critical questions around advocacy. What are your experiences? Some hands-on work. And then ideally, we'd like to end with compiling these needs that we've been hearing and really looking at moving forward and having legislation that addresses these needs. We should be driving some of this with what we know we need. So I would like to welcome Donna, Jan, and Tony to this panel. And Tony, or would you like to just introduce folks? And again, a warm thank you to Adele, John, and Charles.
Thank you, Kathleen. So I'm Tony Isaacs. I'm the Peach Program Director. Peach is a statewide cross-sector early childhood higher ed collaborative. And we have faculty from across the community colleges, the CSUs, UCs, and private IHEs. Unfortunately, Jan won't be here, but I'll turn it over to Donna to introduce herself, and then she will be presenting first.
Hi, I'm Donna Cecil. I am one of the public policy leads for Peach, and I will be presenting part of Jan's presentation that she wrote up, and I hope I do her justice. So when you hear about advocacy and public policy, if you're like me, you just kind of go, oh, I don't know if I can do that. You think it's a big, huge thing. but it's really not. Public policy and advocacy can be small things. So I want us all just to take a second and think about an early positive experience where you witnessed someone stand up for someone else or where someone stood up for you. Just think about that. How you stood up for someone or someone else stood up for you. And just briefly share with us in the chat that experience. You could have, it could be related to yourself personally or someone in your family, but look at it for you first before we get started looking on the greater. I know for my experience, I've been lucky to have a lot of mentors. I had an acting college president who stood up for me and basically advocated for me to go get my master's. So it's small like that. There's a lot of ways that we can get ready to advocate for early childhood. For young children, for families, our students, teachers, directors. It's a big, huge area. And you can think about the ways you're already doing that. If you're a faculty member, we advocate for our students almost on a daily basis in the way that we prepare for the students to come into our courses. You may have to fight with your dean to have a certain course offered or provide opportunities for students. Those of us who have lab schools on our campuses, we're constantly advocating for those. So there's a lot of different areas of advocacy that we can look for. I know this last sentence is missing an L. In the future, CAIC, California Association for Education of Young Children, is going to have a public policy leadership program. It's being developed now. Jan Fish is developing that, and that is her contact information, and she can give you more information. My dean advocate, Catherine, I'm going to read yours. Dean advocated for me and our program to the college president, so the Child Development Center was brought into our instructional division. That's a big fight for a lot of us. That's awesome. I know a lot of us are facing having our programs cut when we need them the most to prepare our workforce. Many of our campuses are cutting the funding, sourcing out our child development centers, or just closing them altogether. Thanks for sharing that, Catherine. Can I have the next slide, please? So one of the ways I'm going to encourage you is to find out who your legislators are. I know this sounds really scary, talking to your legislators, but it's really easy to contact your legislators, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Kathleen, am I going to be able to share my screen? Or can you click on that hyperlink? If it works, I'll put it in the chat also. Okay. So this is how you find your California legislators. You have someone who sits in the Senate and someone who sits in the Assembly. And the first thing you do is put in your street address. I can't enter, so I am going to ask Kathleen if she'll put hers in. Or
Sure.
somebody's in. Thank you. We now know where you live. We're coming to visit.
Yeah, this is such a vicious crowd that I'm going to be expecting. I'll probably get presents.
You probably will be. You probably will be. Lots of wine or something.
Yeah, something.
So you can see that Kathleen's assembly member is Philip Ting, who is you need to know his name because we go for him for education, and Scott Weiner. So if you you can click on either one of them. It takes you to their page. All assembly members and senators have a page, and they have a way to contact them. And his is right in the middle. And if you click that contact button, it's going to tell you how. This is how you can send them an email. It's super easy. Put your name in, your address, your city. They need your name and address to make sure you're still in their district, because we generally don't advocate individually unless they're in our district. And if you keep scrolling down and keep going, keep going. You can select an issue on some of them. Some of them don't have education, some of them have others, but you can write them an email. So you can write a general comment. So let's say that you really think we need to expand, those of us who work with Title V programs, that rate, we need a rate increase for those individual children. That rate increase does not quite cover everything we need to run those programs. You can say, hi, I am so and so from such and such, and I really would like you to get on board with increasing our rate. And you hit submit. That's it. That's all you have to do. That you just advocate it all by yourself. You can do this with almost any issue. And we're going to talk about looking at bills and things that are coming up. You can also just mail them. You can write them a snail mail. They usually have their office for their district and at the state capitol. There's 2 links here, the legislative process, a citizen's guide to participation that can help you, and understanding the budget process, which is a lot of fun. Can I have the next slide, please? So now that we found out how to get hold of our senators and our legislators, let's find out how a bill becomes a law, because that's where the change happens. That's where changes in ed code happen. That's what we need to understand. And California has a legislative system that lasts for 2 years. So right now we're in the 21-22 legislative year. So in odd number years, the legislation meets from January to October. In the even number years, they meet from January to August so they can go home and campaign for their re-elections. So legislative years usually start in an odd year, and we're on the back half of it. The California legislators are only allowed to introduce 40 bills per legislative session collectively. So both the Assembly and the Senate collectively can only introduce 40 bills for that legislative sessions. Now there are exceptions to the rule, like there always is, but this is in general. So 2021 was the start of the legislation session, and we're coming at the end of the 2022. The last day to submit a bill for consideration was February 18th. So that's why you may have seen a lot of bills get submitted, a lot of things come in that weren't very clear. So how do we get a bill in there? How do we get one? It all starts with an idea. It starts with a person. It starts with an agency. It starts with citizens. It could be the legislators themselves or the governor. But you have to find someone either in the Senate or the Assembly to carry the bill. They have to take the bill themselves, and that can be a little tricky, getting legislators to carry a bill, especially if they're in a re-election year. If they're going to be a little hesitant. So you have to know who will carry those bills and kind of figure out who has what their interests are. Once they agree to carry it, they turn it over to the Legislative Council. The council writes it into an actual bill, returns it to the legislator, and then the legislator reads it for the first time. They don't read the whole thing. They just read the bill number, their name as the author, and kind of the descriptive title. Then it sits for 30 days. It just sits. It can't do anything with it for 30 days. During that 30 days, that's a great time to build coalitions. So if you've sponsored this bill and you've helped write this bill as an organization or a person, it's a great time to go out and get other people. Hey, come join us on this bill. We really need this bill. Come talk to us. We want a lot of people on this. So during that 30 days, a lot can happen, and you want to gather that momentum. After 30 days, it goes to the Rules Committee, and then it is assigned to a committee. It either goes into, the key ones we need to worry about are Education and Health and Human Services. If it has any funding attached to it, it has to go to one of the fiscal committees. In committee, it's read by the author. When it's in that first committee, that's when you can come and give public testimony. And you have to look on those calendars, and if you're following with that legislator, they'll let you know when they're going to be reading that bill. That's when you can come and speak to the bill. You can talk about, you can give your own testimony. You can share with them everything that why you think you need this bill. This is where we need that. If you're not comfortable with speaking, that's okay. You can write them a letter. You have to write it before the committee meets, and you have to write the letter to everyone on that committee. And you can contact the legislator holding that bill, and they'll tell you who those people are that you need to write that letter. They read those letters. They want to hear from constituents, especially if it's related to children, families, and education. They need to hear that. They're not experts on this. So that's a great time to come and advocate. Once it gets out of committee, it has to take a majority vote to get out of committee, and it may get revised in that committee. And I'm just giving you the ideal situation, like the quick look at it, but it's going to have what it's called the second reading. Once it gets out of the committee, it goes to the floor, and the author reads the bill for the second time, the whole thing. They read it for the whole thing for everybody that's in the chamber. That's when the author explains stuff. Other legislators can ask questions. They may want something amended, or they're opposed to something, and then they vote on it. Let's pretend our bill got voted on. Now, if it was in the Senate, it has to go to the Assembly and start all over again. So that senator has to find an Assembly member to carry it over to the Assembly, and the whole process starts all over again. So if it goes through the whole Assembly, let's say the Assembly had some problems with it. Then it goes to resolutions of differences. They amend it. It has to go back through the process. Eventually, everybody agrees. They vote on it. It moves on, and it goes to the governors. So you can see why there's a 2-year legislative process. It takes it a minute. So once it gets to the governor, he can sign it into bill. It can become a law, or he can ignore it, or he can veto it. If he vetoes it, it has to go back, gets 2/3 vote, and they can override it. So that was your civics lesson for those of you who cannot remember your 7th and 8th grade civic lessons on how a bill becomes a law in California. There are exceptions, as always, to this. Any questions about my my civics lessons that I did not take in high school or don't remember in high school? I know it sounds like it's really overwhelming, but there are many people on this call today who remembers my first step into public policy. When you speak to legislators, your voice is going to shake. When you stand up, that emotion is going to get you, but that's okay. Just be your authentic self when you're advocating. That's the most important thing, and you can start small. You don't have to do great, giant, huge things. I think that's my last slide, Kathleen, if you'll pat. I think that's my last one. And I'm going to turn it over to Tony.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you, Donna.
So this is where we do some collaboration together, because, you know, none of us on our own could try to figure out this process or track the million bills that are going through each year. You know, unless you're dedicated to doing just this full time, it's really tricky. So there's a lot of different organizations, thank goodness, that really do kind of monitor bills related to early childhood. One of the first ones is CAA EYC, and we put links here, and this way you'll be able to track that once you get the PowerPoint slide. The Los Angeles County Child Care Planning Committee, Michelle Sartell, unfortunately retired, but she did a phenomenal job of tracking all legislation related to early childhood education. You can contact Erica Weiss, who's also from the Child Care Planning Committee in LA. Most of these organizations actually use her work when they track their own bills too. CAPA, which is the California Alternative Payment Programs, they track bills related to the alternative payment programs. Every Child California tracks bills related to the California state preschool programs. First Five California also tracks bills related to the ECE system in general. And then it's also really important, you can check with your local child care planning council, your local First Five, your local R&Rs, family child care networks, parent voices, and other organizations, because they all will do tracking of bills. So if you can go to the next slide.
Also, the California Teachers Association,
yes,
for many represented employees, does a lot of advocacy, as do a range of the individual districts and unions.
Great. So now I'm going to turn it over to who's tracking higher ed legislation. I know this is a very dense slide, so I apologize for the density of the slide. It's just there's so much information, it's hard to put it all into just a couple of slides. So as far as higher ed policy and advocacy for the community colleges, the Faculty Association for the community colleges, the Academic Senate for the community colleges, and the unions all track higher ed legislation. There's a fabulous informational webinar about higher ed legislation. I put the link there. It's about a 2-hour webinar. It's terrific. It will really give you much more detail about issues related to higher education. So in addition to the community colleges, the CSUs, UCs, and private institutions also are tracking legislation that's related to their institutions. Some of the things that we want to think about and that might be on our radar, these are some of the legislation to higher ed that the Faculty Association and the associate students of the community colleges have been tracking. One is AB 1705, which is cleaning up some of the language related to colleges enrolling all students in a transfer level math or English course with some limited exemptions. So that's an important bill that we should be following. In addition, this is something we want to get our students to advocate alongside us with this. AB 1187 by Irwin, which is expanding tutoring for all courses at all levels. That's another bill we want to be tracking. AB 1746, which is Cal Grant reform to expand access to Cal Grant for all community college students. And one more that they're tracking is AB 1752 Santiago, which is part-time faculty pay parity. So those are some of the issues that the Faculty Association and academic senate of the community colleges are tracking. Some of the other things that we might want to think about on our radar, especially at the national level, is teacher loan forgiveness. So as many of you may know, if you teach in a K-12 system full-time for 5 years in a low-income school or educational service agency, you may be eligible for forgiveness up to $17,500. This does not apply to teachers in early childhood programs, but Cory Booker has introduced Senate Bill 4125, the RAISE Act, and the RAISE Act would be amending the IRS code to provide refundable tax credit for early childhood educators to provide a livable wage, and this would be $14,000 a year, and then $9,000 if you're an early childhood educator without a bachelor's degree. So it's not only requiring you to have a credential like the K-12, but it also allows early childhood educators without the bachelor's degree to get the credit. The other thing we want to be on top of is reaching out to our legislators around Biden's student loan forgiveness. I know he goes back and forth about what would be the amount, maybe $20,000 if we've heard it up to $50,000. So these are things that we can rally around. These are issues that are really important to our students. We can, get them to be allies with us and to send legislators. And, this is an opportunity, especially if you're teaching at an administration or a leadership class, let's give extra credit for doing some advocacy in our courses. Other issues would be around high-speed internet, funding to support faculty to incorporate requirements related to the ECE credential. So these are all things that I think would be really important that we want to reach out to our legislators and ask them to go ahead and support higher education. So if you want to just go over to the next slide. So this is just another dense slide showing some of the advocacy efforts that Peach has taken, and then some opportunities for you to get involved in advocacy. One of the things Peach has done is we created a career and college pathways toolkit, looking at the workforce at all the different pathways, from those who are family, friends, and neighbors wanting to get their health and safety training so that they can become licensed childcare providers, all the way up to getting your first permit, to getting your AA degree, bachelor's degree. And we're being optimistic. We have 10 different levels going all the way up to the doctoral program. And we know that this is something that's really needed in early childhood, especially as we look at, increasing the capacity of our faculty is to offer early childhood specific master degree programs. We've been involved in the ECE Coalition's budget requests. The ECE Coalition is an coalition of about 35 different early childhood organizations. Some of those that I had mentioned earlier, like the R&Rs, the unions, the different advocacy groups, Childcare Now, all of these different organizations that rally around specific budget asks. And fortunately, many of those budget asks this year have been, we've seen so far in the governor's budget, have been approved. So some of the things that the coalition was looking at is increasing childcare provider wages, asking for a 20% increase, supporting Head Start programs, providing retirement and health benefits for early childhood providers, waiving family fees. We just heard that went ahead and passed, so that's really exciting. Childcare infrastructure grants. So as we know, as K-12 is expanding, there's going to be need for more facilities, but also we also need facilities within the community, the co-location of childcare facilities within affordable housing projects, and workforce development grants. So those are a few of the budget asks of the ECE Coalition. We've provided public testimony and written statements for CTC around the revised child development permit, around the ECE credential, around the master plan, the Blue Ribbon Commission. We've participated in many different advocacy days, such as the Kappa Advocacy Day, the CAA EYC's advocacy days, NAEYC advocacy days. And so we just recently did a training, which was an advocacy action day, where we actually sent emails to our legislators asking them to support the ECE Coalition budget asks. And so I just, on the other side here, I included a few upcoming advocacy opportunities for you. CDSS is going to have a webinar around the May revise of the California budget. CAA EYC is also doing a May revise. I don't have that link yet, but once I do, I'll forward it over to Kathleen. There's ongoing training from the Faculty Association and Associate Students, Academic Senate of the California Community Colleges. So they have another training Besides the webinar, they have another training on May 24th, and there's a link to sign up for that training. Peach has an advocacy and policy committee meeting. They meet once a month. The next meeting will be on June 6th at 3 o'clock. Peach is providing a presentation through CAA EYC around the ECE credential. And then the CTC is having a meeting to go ahead and probably vote on the ECE credential. So those are some important ways that you can be involved in some upcoming advocacy efforts. So I'm gonna just ask Kathleen to move it to the next slide. And if you could put into the link, we did create a separate Jamboard because we really want to know now what are your priorities for advocacy. It's really important that higher ed collaborates together and we could be a united voice. And so on the Jamboard, we ask you to say what are your priorities related to college students, related to the early childhood education system, to the K-12 system, for college faculty, for higher ed systems, children and families, and special populations. I know it's a lot of information, but really put in there what's your passion, either on the Jamboard or in the chat. And Kathleen, I'm not sure if you shared that. Did you share that Jamboard link?
I think I'm waiting for Tracy to come back.
Oh.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's there, but I'll post it again.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. So yes, so we asked.
I can't see anything.
Okay, yeah, if you can, please.
I can barely do anything.
Just
So.
post that because, you know, we're better together and we really want to be united and strong. And so it's very important that we all work together collaboratively and advocate, reach out to our legislators. So thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to talk about advocacy, and we welcome you all to our next Peach advocacy meeting so you could learn how you can become an advocate. So thank you.
I'm getting some questions about how to join Peach. There's no membership fee. There's no form to fill out. You can contact Tony or me and we'll just add you to the listserv. That's about it. Anyone in higher ed can be a part. We welcome everyone and we encourage everyone to be a part of a group. It's much easier to advocate when you're with other people. And again, I really want to emphasize that it doesn't take a lot. It's just one little baby step. I can still remember when I had to talk to the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. I was texting Tony and Barbara and Nancy and Jan, and I was afraid I was going to cry, but I got through it. My voice shook. It's okay. We can all do this, and we have to do it. We can't wait for others to do it for us. We're happy to do it, but the more of us that advocate, the more they don't hear from higher ed in the numbers that they hear from other areas. And I know there's a lot of ECE folks, education folks, I'm not saying, but higher ed, our voice isn't that big. We need to have a bigger voice because we're advocating not only for our institutions, we're advocating for our students, we're advocating for children, and we're advocating for families. We can't separate those out. We cannot. Those are our North Stars. We have to keep that in mind. We can't separate. Other places can say, here you are, you're a veterinarian. You know, they don't tell them, my husband's a veterinarian. They don't tell them about worrying about families and all this stuff. Nope, here are the animals. We can't do that as who we are. We have to be advocates for a broader people in California. So I'm going to get off my soapbox now. Hope
Thank you
to
for your
see
input.
all of you at the next meeting.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Donna, for your ideas. And I did put in the chat that one of the reasons why we wanted to host kind of a higher ed symposium was that we're going to gather your input. And ideally, we'll have clusters of needs and concerns across the spectrum, from ECE to after school to education to TK, and we can come up with some potential pieces of legislation for us for next year, and some things to really track that we can uniformly agree on, land on. I think TK has brought our sector together. It transcends every every element that I think had been separate, but now we're absolutely all in the same position here, trying to develop this workforce. So thank you for your input, and hopefully this is the first of many conversations from higher ed. So I'm putting up everyone's emails on here. Just, grab what you think is helpful. I think Adele stepped off, and so she was going to send the link when she had it. It was just released to that Monday meeting, but I don't have it yet, so I can add it to this PowerPoint, and feel free to email me if you're interested and need it. You have my email. I'd like to conclude, and I cannot believe, oh my goodness, look at this. We are really on time. Amazing. We could have taken a 1 minute longer break, but thank you all for being with us. Thank you all for sharing your Friday with us. Thank you to our higher ed community and to our presenters, to our participants. And I know that based on all of your reactions, your involvement in the chat, your Jamboard involvement, you have great ideas, and hopefully we can all together put them into action. So I hope you learned from today, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for being here. And so I'll.
Can I do it? I'm sorry. Can I do a plug?
Sure.
Sure. That focus group coming up right after. I know it's been a long day, but if anybody would like to stay on, I'll put it in the chat again. We would love to see anybody who's interested in being there. So please join us if you're able to. Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who helped, to Tracy, to Renee, to Steve. I mean, all our panelists, thank you so much. And thank you to such an involved workforce symposium collection of participants. Amazing, great ideas, great participation. So please enjoy your weekend. You actually get 6 free minutes here. So I guess go eat lunch. Or dinner or something.
Special thanks to Kathleen White for coordinating and organizing and putting this all together. Kath, you thought you retired, and we just keep asking you to keep supporting us. So thank you so much, Kathleen, for your ongoing leadership. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. And thanks for Teach for LA and Teach for the Bay for supporting this. We just need to hang together. Lots of needs, lots of ideas. So thank you so much. And if anyone, we've got a few panelists hanging out. If anyone has any quick questions, you can put it in the chat. I'll leave it open until exactly 3. So we have about 5 minutes. Then I have to go eat. It's just going to be urgent that I have to eat.
Thanks so much, Kathleen, for giving us the opportunity to present.
I wanted to know how you think Renee's next symposium would be different from what we just did. Do you have any idea?
It's the focus group, Carol, for the
higher ed,
PK through 3. No, it's one of the focus
PK
groups through 3 credentials. So you know how we had the focus groups in the past?
Yes.
It's another focus group, and it's specifically for the credential.
Okay.
So I expect to see you there.
I've signed up, but I just wanted to make sure it wasn't a repeat.
Because it wouldn't be a meeting unless you and I were in it together.
I know. Thank you. See you there.
Is there any way that you can post the link again? Renee sent me the link, but it was actually the registration link. It wasn't the link. to the, and I'm helping her with that.
Debbie, when you register, at the bottom it says, please click this URL to join. So once you register, a box should come up that tells you how to join.
Oh.
And what folks are talking about
see meeting registration approved, you should have that box that said meeting registration approved. Did you get that when you signed up for it?
Join meeting in progress.
Yeah, that would be it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And what people are talking about is in our chat, we have a link. It's a different link to a P3 credential focus group, only on the P3 credential. So a small subset of what we talked about today, but they want higher ed input. So P3 higher ed input credential.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to be
Bye.
signing off. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Hi, Nancy.